targets every year for 14 years. We're renewing the nation's commitment to those who serve through the biggest pay rise for over 20 years, free childcare for forces families across the UK, and the biggest upgrade to forces housing in a generation. Armed forces numbers are now growing, part of the transformation of defence in the Defence Investment Plan, which I can tell the House the Prime Minister is determined to publish before the NATO summit.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his answer.
Order. Sorry. Mr. Francois, we have two questions in a second. I'm sure we can hold on just for a minute. Please.
Mr. Speaker, joining the armed forces demands a huge personal commitment from young people, but those who put their hand up to serve can wait the best part of a year or more with little communication, no sense of progress and real frustration that their commitment to our country is not being matched. And that frustration often leads to them to seek different opportunities. So does the Secretary of State agree that solving recruitment isn't just about improving an online portal, but about building a genuine relationship with potential recruits from day one? And what is he doing to deliver that now ahead of that new portal rollout next year?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman is right. The recruitment to our forces for too long has been beset by delays that has led to no shortage of those young people who want to join the forces, but a large majority of them going off and doing other things. He will have seen the way that we've changed the regulations that often restricted and were barriers to young people joining. He will have seen the direct entry that we've done for cyber recruitment, and he will see the new contract we're set to put in place next year for the first ever tri-nation recruitment that will speed it up and make it more efficient.
Red Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For all of the years that I served as a regular in the military, the continuous attitude survey showed that morale was dropping year on year. Since Labour have come into government, that has reversed, and the continuous attitude survey at last is going in the right direction under this leadership. Can the Secretary of State explain why he thinks this is?
Mr. Speaker, there's a very serious point behind my honourable friend's question. Armed forces numbers are now growing. We've turned the corner on recruitment and on morale, as he says. And satisfaction in particular with military homes has risen 12% in the last year. This is a government on the side of our forces and their families. This is a government delivering for defence and delivering for our armed forces.
Mark Francois, Shadow Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I begin by saying from these benches we stand four square with the government in response to Romania. They are a NATO ally. They deserve our support. While overall trends in recruitment and retention may have stabilised, there's still a very serious problem of personnel leaving the Special Forces. We know from the personal accounts of former SAS commanders that this is due in no small part to the government's facilitation of lawfare against their comrades who served in Northern Ireland. So to aid retention, what is the Secretary of State's personal response to the three Special Forces regimental associations who publicly warned him in late April that the egregious mistreatment of veterans and the ongoing infringement of their rights has to end? What is his response to them on that, please?
Mr. Speaker, I simply don't recognise the honourable gentleman's description. And in the discussions that I and my honourable friend, the member of the Armed Forces and military leaders have had with the regimental associations, this has dealt with the concerns that they've got, in particular with the Northern Ireland Legacy Bill. We're set to make significant amendments that reflect their concerns. And in terms of the position he describes on recruitment and retention, there is no shortage of volunteers for training, and for the paratroops, the proportion of those applying now to the paras has risen by a quarter in the last year.
Oh, France.
Thank you, sir. He said he didn't recognise my description. It's not mine. It's in a statement of the 22nd of April from the three Special Forces regimental associations. They are not my words. They are theirs. So can I ask him again? If we're to persuade people to continue serving their king and country in uniform in very high threat situations, we need to address these very legitimate concerns. The government has been promising for months now to table amendments to their Benighted Troubles Bill to provide additional protections for veterans. But rather like the Defence Investment Plan, we're still waiting for Godot. So when exactly are these long-promised amendments actually going to be published, and by which minister?
Before the bill is due for its next stage in Parliament, which is committee stage in this House.
Sir Julian Smith.
Question number 2, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Lead, like other critical minerals and the broader range of chemicals that go into producing energetics and ammunition, has seen constrained supply over the last 5 years. That's why we're taking a strategic approach to our munitions management, which includes rebuilding depleted stockpiles, investment in always-on facilities and munitions, and building new energetics factories in the UK.
Sir Julian.
Thank you for the answer. The upcoming ban on lead in commercial bullets is, according to the ammunitions industry, going to cause significant problems for police and armed forces in terms of cost and in terms of supply. Viking Arms in my constituency are deeply worried about this issue. They supply the military and the police. Would he meet with them and any other suppliers to hear their concerns about this problem?
I'm very happy meeting the honourable gentleman and his constituents. We inherited stockpiles that were much lower than we would like, and it is one of the determinations of this government to refill those stockpiles, and anything that goes into the construction and rebuilding of those is something that's important to me. Very happy meeting to discuss further.
Sarah Owen.
Question number 3, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Before I start, I would just like to recognise the honourable member's incredible work on widening access to bereavement leave for new parents. And I know, speaking to a constituent of mine, how much of a godsend that is for those parents who very tragically find themselves in that position. So I just want to recognise that. The Armed Forces Occupational Paternity Leave Scheme provides equivalent arrangements to statutory provision, including full pay. In 2025, 1,684 service personnel took paternity leave. The MOD also makes provision for shared parental leave to ensure that parents have greater flexibility to share the responsibility for the care of their child.
Sarah Owen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Minister for her kind words. It really means a lot, and for her answer there. We know the sacrifice armed forces make is felt by their entire family. When a new baby arrives, this is felt even more deeply. 2 weeks paternity leave is just not enough. Many, including the dad shift, want an increase in parental leave. Our Women and Equality Select Committee recommended a change to at least 6 weeks parental leave for dads. Would the Minister agree that all dads need quality time to support the other parent, bond with newborns, and that armed forces families are owed this vital time together?
I thank her for raising a very important point, and I would highlight that there are other mechanisms available to give leave, but I would really welcome meeting with her to discuss this issue further. Thank you.
Oh, Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Honourable Lady for Little North for bringing this forward. The Honourable Lady is a champion. That's a word often used in this chamber, but it's true today. Can I thank the Minister for that response? But in relation to how we promote this and how government promotes it, it's important when it comes to the recruitment. It's important when it comes to letting people know that life in the army is normal as it is in civil life. The same opportunities are there. What will the Minister do to ensure that that's promoted in recruitment and ensure that everyone knows what the opportunities are and the benefits are when it comes to joining the forces? Thank you.
I thank the honourable member for highlighting what I think is quite good provision in the armed forces, particularly the maternity pay as well, which isn't always first on people's minds when they join the armed forces. There are a range of benefits beyond just pay that we offer to our armed forces recruits when they begin a career. And he's absolutely right, we should make sure that we highlight the round in the package, because as someone who benefited from it myself, there are some excellent things in there.
Conrad.
Question number 5, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
With the permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll answer questions 5 and 17 together. Russia poses a significant and persistent threat to UK and to Atlantic security. Putin's illegal war against Ukraine is now in its 5th year, and at the same time, Russia conducts hostile cyber activity, disinformation and sabotage against the UK and many other NATO allies on an almost daily basis. European security starts in Ukraine, and in response to the brutal Russian attacks recently on Ukraine, I've directed UK deliveries of air defence systems to Ukraine to be accelerated, and this month I will chair the next 50-strong NATO, the 50-strong nations of the Ukraine Defence Contact Group at NATO headquarters, when we will look to step up still further the military aid we can provide together for Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government has rightly increased the level of military support to Ukraine to its highest ever level, which is vital not just for their security but for ours. We know that our leadership on this issue places us in the firing line of an increasingly desperate Putin, with the stark warning from CCHQ last week that our nation is being relentlessly targeted by Russian aggression. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that, as well as rightly increasing defence spending, we must unite against Russia by seeking a closer relationship with our most important and reliable allies in the European Union?
Mr. Speaker, I agree with my honourable friend that we are right to seek a closer relationship with the European Union. Within a NATO-first framework, the European Union have important contributions to play. That's why we signed last year the Security and Defence Partnership with the European Union. And that's why the Prime Minister has also said we look to join the European Union's Ukraine loan scheme so we can provide more aid to Ukraine, backed by the very best British companies, producing the best British kit for those Ukrainian warfighters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend has just mentioned the annual lecture delivered by the GCHQ director last week, which I think is important, and the comments about Russia's hybrid warfare I think we should all reflect on. And it's well established among security experts that Russia are conducting this kind of hybrid warfare, but it's not, I think, well understood by the general public. And that's a problem because to deter it requires significant investment and inevitably at some point trade-offs. So can I urge the Secretary of State to produce internally, or increase the urgency of it if it exists, a strategy to communicate the scale of Russian hybrid warfare against the United Kingdom?
I completely agree with my honourable friend. We are doing more to expose the threats, and we will do more still. The Russian threat against the UK is real and it is rising. And it's important for the public and it's important for Parliament to understand that. That's why I revealed last year the Russian spy ship, Yantar, as it monitored our critical national infrastructure under siege. And that's why I exposed the month-long Russian submarine covert programme in and near UK waters. And I say to Putin, we see you, we'll expose you, and we will not stand for you targeting the UK.
Sir David Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning, France once again demonstrated that seizing sanctioned Russian shadow fleet vessels in international waters is both legal and achievable. Now, in contrast, the Prime Minister confirmed on the 25th of March that we have the legal basis to act in our own territorial waters. Yet since that pledge, hundreds of vessels have passed through unchallenged. So does the Secretary of State agree that this is deterrence in reverse? Tough rhetoric, no action. And in Moscow, that gap between what Britain says and what Britain does will be read as exactly one thing: weakness.
This is deterrence in action. I'm surprised the honourable gentleman doesn't recognise the fact that we supported the French operation and were proud to do so. Defence stands ready to lead our own interdiction, but the impact of what we are ready to do and what we have signalled to Putin is that he's having to escort shadow shipping through the English Channel with Russian warships, and the rest of his shadow fleet are often detouring right round the UK. We're disrupting his shadow fleet shipping, and we've contributed to the fact that Russian oil revenues have fallen by a quarter in the last year.
Mr. Speaker, there is a chasm between supporting and between leading. Is it not the case that the Attorney General, the same Attorney General who has no hesitation in hounding British veterans through the courts, has now decided that intercepting Russian shadow fleet tankers would breach maritime law? Our allies in Finland, in Sweden and Estonia have no such hesitation. France and the United States have no such hesitation. So can the Secretary of State explain why the only person who seems determined to tie Britain's hands is his own government's chief legal officer?
Well, the honourable gentleman is entirely wrong with his assertion and his facts. I led, with the Attorney-General, a meeting of the 10 Jeff nations, the legal military experts, in which we set out and discussed and shared the legal basis on which individually and together we can interdict and seize Russian shadow ships. We're ready to do so as the UK. We're ready to do so in support of allies, as we have just done with France. And together, we're deterring Putin and we're disrupting his shadow fleet operations.
Spokesperson James Wickley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last night, I returned from a week in Ukraine. I visited villages in Kherson, just tens of kilometres from the front line, where I saw the total devastation wrought by Russian forces. Every morning we woke up to reports of hundreds of drones that have been destroyed overnight by the Ukrainian military. Ukraine is innovating under Russian fire. So my question is, what steps is the government taking to accelerate defence cooperation with Ukraine to ensure that our armed forces can rapidly learn from, develop and deploy the counter-drone capabilities needed for the wars of today and tomorrow, not yesterday?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman makes a really important argument. It was captured in the Strategic Defence Review. It's been put into practice since, and I saw within the last 2 weeks, when I was with our troops close to the Russian front line in Estonia, exactly how our own UK forces, alongside the Estonians, are learning the lessons and implementing some of the same tactics and technologies that we have been involved in supplying to Ukraine, and the Ukrainians have demonstrated a combat fit.
Dr. Neil Shastri-Hurst.
Question number 6, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, we have accepted the Strategic Defence Review recommendation to introduce a defence readiness bill. As he will know, readiness measures are already included in the Armed Forces Bill that is before the House again tomorrow. Engagement across government and with industry is underway on the Defence Readiness Bill, and I'm proud that it is a Labour government that is planning to introduce a Defence Readiness Bill, a bill that when his party was in power they neither thought of nor did themselves. It's something that shows that in these changing times that Labour is on the side of our armed forces and the side of a stronger Britain.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The government's constant refrain is that they're working at pace. The reality is that our adversaries are doing exactly that. And in an increasingly unstable world, the lack of a defence readiness bill is a significant disadvantage. So can the Minister set out when that will be published and specifically set out a date it will come before the House?
It's so disappointing, Mr. Speaker, that with a question on the Defence Readiness Bill, where he could be saying what measures he wants, all he wants is a timetable, doesn't care what's in it. We care about the content of what is in the Defence Readiness Bill. We will get it right and we'll bring it before this House. And when it does, I hope he supports it.
Jessica, you've changed your mind. Chris Minster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and a thank you to the Chair of the PLP for letting me get in. Can I welcome the Government's commitment to a defence readiness bill and also welcome the record funding for defence in this country and the 1,200 deals already signed when it comes to defence procurement. As I haven't mentioned Harlow yet this week, can he assure me that he will work with those defence manufacturers like Raytheon in Harlow to ensure that we are prepared in the event of some of the terrible things going on in the world, and that we are, and this, as part of the Defence Readiness Bill, he will be having those conversations.
Well, my honourable friend is a real champion for Harlow and his constituency. Look, as we are increasing defence spending, we're directing more of that increasing defence budget at British companies. Not just the large ones, but British SMEs as well. I'll be very happy meeting with him to discuss how we can support the SMEs in his constituency to receive more of a share of that increasing defence budget with this government.
Number 7, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We inherited a broken procurement system of red tape, delays and high costs. 47 of 49 major defence programmes were delayed or not on budget when we came to office. We're speeding up procurement, buying British and aiming to increase direct SME spend by 50%, which represents an extra £2.5 billion that we will spend with UK SMEs.
Speaker, in the South West, the defence sector
and associated supply chains provides over 40,000 jobs and contributes more than $3 billion to the economy. In West Dorset, these firms provide skilled employment and apprenticeships, but firms are frustrated by the repeated delays to the Defence Investment Plan and a slow and uncertain procurement process. Companies in my constituency have been telling me that at this rate they will be European or US headquartered by this time next year. We risk losing jobs, sovereign capability and billions of pounds of investment. I welcome Secretary of State announcing that the DIP will be released before the NATO summit, although I'm sure the House will note that with a degree of scepticism. But I would like to know how the release of DIP and the procurement process is going to benefit those businesses, especially SMEs, in the South West.
Well, can I thank him for his question. As a fellow South West MP, I know how important defence is for businesses large and small in our part of the world. That's why since the general election we've signed 1,200 major defence deals. We've done the analysis on just 500 of those. That represents 500 of those contracts delivered benefit for 8,000 SMEs and micro SMEs. We'll continue to increase the amount of spend that we have directly with small businesses, just as we're speeding up the procurement, because we inherited a system that was broken, that didn't work, and we're speeding it up to make sure we can get more contracts to those brilliant innovators in our economy as soon as we can.
Matt West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Those of us who are interested in subsea cables will have been very delighted to hear the news announced over the weekend about this AUKUS arrangement that the government was speaking to and the development of new technologies with unmanned drone vehicles for subsea capability. Can I just ask the Minister, beyond that, to be looking also at the drone capability in this country, specifically companies like Skycutter and other sovereign capabilities that we have, to ensure that with the investment plans, that we get the right investment into those companies to make sure that they stay here in the United Kingdom?
Well, can I thank my more friend for his question? He's absolutely right. After many years of much talk under the last government about AUKUS Pillar 2, this government has delivered a project and a capability that will, in the hands of our warfighters, both British, Australian and American, make a real difference. But he's right to talk about autonomy and drones. As a government, we are committed to increasing the funding for drones and for autonomy. We've invested in more capabilities in the United Kingdom, and we're actively exporting those capabilities to our friends and allies abroad. He should expect to see more of that in the Defence Investment Plan being published.
Drew Stone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Falcon Works, part of the BAE Systems family, and the Enterprise Zone at Wharton have been at the cutting edge of learning the lessons from rapid deployment and redesign of unmanned aircraft in Ukraine. And a key part of that is including that pre-investment in research and development as part of procurement of defence systems. So will the Minister commit to continuing to work with companies like Falcon Works that support huge amounts of jobs in Fylde and across Lancashire?
Well, can I join him in commending Falcon Works and BAE Systems for their innovation? As a government, we have established UK defence innovation, a £400 million annual budget to support innovation. That is making a difference in bringing more innovation to the market, and also with dual use potential as well. We'll continue to invest in that, just as we set out that 10% of our equipment budget will be spent on novel technologies, helping drive the latest kit and equipment for our troops.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know with interest the Minister rightly says that the need to focus on drone production is something that's gaining more and more ground. But can you tell me, are we anywhere near understanding within the MOD the sheer size and numbers of drones and counter-drones that will need to be produced both now and in the future and on a mass scale should any conflict break out? Can you give an assurance to the House that is understood within the MOD?
Yes, I can. One of the key pillars of the Strategic Defence Review is learning the lessons from Ukraine, and that is when it comes to autonomous systems and drones, not just the continuing investment that we are making in those high-end drone capabilities, both ISR, one-way strike, and other capabilities, but also how we can deliver mass effect as well. Due to the rapid iteration of drone technology, it doesn't necessarily always make sense to have a warehouse full of millions of drones, but having the ability to produce millions of drones with recognising the shortages in the supply chain, especially around motors and magnets and cameras, for instance, is the way that we can enhance our capabilities and enhance our deterrence. So it is something we're actively working on.
James McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I regularly meet with defence SMEs, and they tell me the same thing. Without a defence investment plan, investment decisions are being delayed, expansion plans are being put on hold, and opportunities risk being lost overseas. British firms stand ready to grow, hire and strengthen our national resilience, but continued delays from government are creating undamaged uncertainty across the sector. So can the Minister tell me, has his department, or indeed any other government department, conducted an economic assessment of the impact the delay is having on British businesses of the publication of the Defence Investment Plan? And if not, will he commit to publishing one?
Well, I can tell him what the 1,200 contracts we've signed since the general election, because we're not waiting for a defence investment plan to sign contracts with companies large and small. They're producing new jobs and new apprenticeships, more demand for skills, new technologies being used by our frontline forces and exported to our allies. All the work that he suggests is part of our bigger picture for the Defence Investment Plan. We know that the increased defence spending will produce more UK jobs. We're spending more with British companies. We'll continue to do so. And I will stand up for our armed forces and our defence industry. And I hope that he will be able to talk our defence industry up rather than talk it down as he has today.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Question 8, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, with permission, I'd like to answer questions 8 and 14 together. This government's making the biggest increase in defence investment since the end of the Cold War. This year alone, we have more than 11 billion more in the defence budget than in the last year of the last government. And as the Prime Minister said in February, we're going to have to spend more faster, and we will.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Building our military capability is vital in this world of increasing instability, where Putin continues to wage war in Europe, as we've heard, and Trump rips up the alliances that once kept us safe. Investment in deterrence is far better than fighting a war unprepared. Key to getting UK businesses access to the Security Action for Europe programme is vital. So can the Minister confirm if talks have restarted with the EU in this regard, and if so, what progress has been made?
Mr Speaker, I mentioned this in a previous answer. We are indeed looking to participate and to be able to take advantage of the European Union's loan scheme for Ukraine. This is a way that we could accelerate good kit into the hands of the Ukrainians and ensure that British-made kit and British firms can make a big contribution to that.
Victoria Collins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My constituent Fraser puts it best when he says, at a time when the world is increasingly dark and uncertain, and when the UK's defence capability is well below the level required, defence bonds are surely one which would gain support across the political spectrum. I know that I would happily invest. Mr Speaker, with all of us here in the United Kingdom also paying the price every time we check out or pay a bill, the Liberal Democrat calls to issue £20 billion of defence bonds would be an injection of funding in our security but also our economy. So I'd like to know, what are the government waiting for?
Well, Mr Speaker, I remember for at least 6 months after the last election, she and her party were urging us to raise defence spending to 2.5% of GDP by 2030. We've done better than that. We're hitting 2.6% next year, 3 years before anyone expected, including her party. We will go further, and I look for her support when we do.
That's in charge of the Select Committee.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Some right honourable members have advocated for defence bonds, but as the Secretary of State will be aware that the Defence Committee has examined in detail various defence financing options, including the Defence Security and Resilience Bank, for which the Canadians have stolen the march on us, even though the idea was developed by a former British Army officer. There are multilateral defence mechanisms, and other nations have opted for a loosening of the fiscal rules just for defence. Obviously, this is not an either-or option, but given the increased threats and the level of volatility, we must accelerate investment in defence to 3% GDP spend in this Parliament. So, given that context, Secretary of State, what is the government's option? What is its pursued course of action? Because we cannot keep plodding along at the current pace. We must meet the moment.
with all due respect, and I have a great deal of respect for my honourable friend, his description of the biggest increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War is hardly a plodding path. I say to him this: I welcome his committee's inquiry and its report into defence investment. I know Gordon Brown, the former Prime Minister, that has been commissioned by the Prime Minister to look at multinational financing of security in the future, will use his report as an important part of his work, which I welcome. But I just say to him, he will be aware that the Prime Minister in February in his Munich speech said, we must build hard power because that is the currency of the age. We know we must spend more faster, and I just say to him, we will.
Speaker.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I should like to answer questions 9 and 13 together. This year, we have provided £480,000 to part fund 130 Armed Forces Day community events, up from 85 last year. The national event on the 27th of June will be in Aldershot and Farnborough, celebrating and thanking our armed forces who are doing a brilliant job keeping the UK secure at home and strong abroad. Armed Forces Day has an important purpose: to reconnect society with our armed forces and to communicate why a strong defence matters.
That reply. To celebrate Armed Forces Day this year in Rochdale, we'll have not only the usual flag-raising ceremony at Rochdale Town Hall, but also on Saturday, June the 27th, we'll have a free community picnic with live music from local bands and from military vehicle displays at Deanhurst Park. Would the Minister join me in thanking Adam Trenery of Get Together After Serving, known as GTAS in Rochdale, who has put on this marvellous event, and also thank him for all the work he does all year round?
Absolutely. This government is very proud to support veterans in Rochdale, and I'm so pleased that we've been able to provide funding for what sounds like a fantastic Armed Forces Day event. And a huge thank you to Adam Trenery and GTAS for the amazing work that he's doing to support our service people and veterans. Whether the Armed Forces Day flag-raising ceremony that he refers to at Rochdale Town Hall or the military breakfast, I know that we are very proud to support our service people and veterans and our communities for the contribution they make to our society.
You on standby?
Forces Day is as important as ever, and I look forward to attending Falkirk's Armed Forces Day on the 4th of July in Calendar Park. It is important that Falkirk's veterans are heard there and every day. I met with Forth Valley veterans together last week and heard from many brave men and women who served their country that they feel politicians have not been listening for a long time, a perception we must take seriously and seek to reverse. What will ministers do to support veterans' voices being heard before, after and during Armed Forces Day?
So the new Valour programme, as well as making it easier for veterans to access the care and support that they deserve, will also crucially improve how we make sure that they have their voices heard. We have opened the first 14 Valour centres just in March just gone, and applications for round 2 for further centres are currently open. In addition to Valour, we also have the wider services support, such as Op Courage for mental health or Op Restore for physical health, as well as Op Fortitude for those at risk of homelessness and Op Ascend for employment support. All of these veterans can access, and I welcome any feedback on this.
Julian?
I fear I know the answer to this question in advance, but I shall ask it anyway. Would not one way of reconnecting society with the armed forces at Armed Forces Day be to revisit the testimony given to the then Defence Committee in March 2017 by 4 eminent professors of law, showing how it's possible to protect veterans from being hauled before the courts for using lethal force against terrorists in the act of committing terrorism? That testimony deserves revisiting. It shows it can be done. Will the government re-examine it and reinstate the immunity and the investigative processes which enable it to be done?
He is very well aware of how strongly I believe that it is important that those who have been victims have a right to have investigations, and this includes into the murders of British service personnel. I do take his point, and I'm sure people are very well aware of the point that he makes.
Josh Babrin.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker. This Armed Forces Day will mark the first that Eastbourne commemorates without Staff Sergeant Pauline Cole, a local veteran who died last year. Pauline received military compensation for injuries she received during her service, but she had her pension credit cut because her compensation was considered as income. So this Armed Forces Day, to mark it, will the Minister review that arrangement so that we can make sure that our veterans are not punished for their service to our country?
I thank him for raising this important issue, and I'm very sorry to hear that about Pauline. As I'm sure he is aware, the interplay between benefits that are available to the general public and military benefits can be complex, but I do think it is important to state that there are mechanisms to ensure that no veteran is left out with how those benefits interplay. If he's able to write to me with the specifics, I will be able to clarify if the correct processes were followed.
Picture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question number 10, please.
Minister.
On the 21st of May, I visited the London Oratory School to meet with cadets and announce the first ever National Cadets Week, which will take place in October 2026. This week will celebrate the cadet forces, which are one of this country's most effective youth organisations. And a new Cadets Action Plan will set out the government's long-term vision to deliver on the Strategic Defence Review recommendation to expand our cadet forces.
Picture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the announcement of the first National Cadets Week, and I look forward to the new Cadets Action Plan and the long-term vision for cadet forces. The figures released last week showing that more than 1 million young people are not in education, employment or training are deeply worrying, both for young people themselves and for the wider society. Cadet forces can help meet that challenge by giving young people confidence, discipline, skills, structure and a sense of purpose, supporting them to succeed and thrive. How will the Minister ensure that cadet opportunities are not only maintained but expanded so that young people in communities such as Doncaster East and the Isle of Axholme continue to benefit?
He is absolutely right to highlight how fundamental the cadets can be, particularly for those who are at risk of not going on to further education, employment or training. Cadet Forces provides a fantastic opportunity for young people to have a go at something that isn't school and to gain confidence and find out what it is that they want to do. The Cadet Action Plan will have 3 key aims. Firstly is to how we can recruit and support adult volunteers, without whose amazing work we wouldn't have the cadets at all. Secondly, to make sure that we have the correct support, including support to infrastructure for our cadets. And thirdly, to make sure that every young person in this country is aware of the amazing things that they can gain from the cadets.
But generally,
for a town like Newark, the establishment of a combined cadet force at the Newark Academy was an incredible step forward. It brought discipline, respect, training opportunities, and a sense of pride. It was very unfortunate that the Department for Education chose to cut the funding so that it's more difficult for other schools, particularly ones like this in working class communities, to establish new combined cadet forces in the future. What can the Minister say to ensure that the funding is in place, so this is not just a preserve of those with grammar schools or public schools, but that all communities, like the one that I represent, have the opportunity to have combined cadet forces in the future?
Yeah, well done. I'm sure he'll be well aware that we've committed an additional £70 million to fund the expansion of the cadets, something that his government never did.
Alex McIntyre.
Number 11, please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. SMEs are crucial to our success. Through the Office of Small Business Growth, we're cutting red tape and getting our ambitious SME target to additional £2.5 billion by summer 2028. Last week, we announced with Sweden the Gripen contract for £500 million, benefits shared not just by large companies, but by small businesses across the United Kingdom, reinforcing that defence is an engine for growth.
Alex McIntyre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the remarks the Secretary of State made in relation to Romania? Last week, I visited Romania with the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme and met with Armed Forces personnel who are part of the NATO air policing mission. The incident with the drone from Russia shows just how important that mission is and the good work that our Armed Forces personnel are doing in Romania as we speak. Turning to my substantive question, I recently visited Purmally and Cherry and White in my constituency of Gloucester. They are two local SMEs working in the defence industry and doing an excellent job. Both are important local employers and are keen to expand their businesses. Will my honourable friend agree with me that we should be doing everything we can to support British SMEs like Purmally and Cherry and White through defence procurement? And will he agree to visit Gloucester and meet with these brilliant businesses?
Can I thank my friend for his words around our armed forces and the typhoons that we have in Romania doing air policing roles? Absolutely essential, and with a NATO-first approach, we'll continue to do that. I'm very happy meeting with him to talk about Cherry and White and Purmally, two outstanding companies providing communication systems and composite materials to defence. There's a real lesson for many other SMEs wanting to supply into defence to look at the success of companies like that. I'll be very happy meeting him to discuss their interests.
Speaker, defence SMEs are key supporters and indeed organisers of Somerset Armed Forces Day, but the day won't be a success if the glitches in the application software are not resolved, alongside volunteer veterans having to shoulder tens of thousands of pounds of debt, given the way the funding works. Would the Ministry be willing to meet with me and with the organisers so that these challenges can be resolved and Somerset Armed Forces Day can go ahead?
I'm not that minister, but the correct minister has heard his pleas and will be very happy meeting him to discuss that further.
Dr. Peter Prinsley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question number 12, please.
Minister.
The Royal Navy, in collaboration with the Joint Maritime Security Centre, maintains constant surveillance of the UK waters to uphold maritime security and deter threats. With a combination of surface, subsurface vessels, maritime patrol aircraft and autonomous assets ready to support. As we transition, importantly, to a hybrid Navy, we'll see this surveillance increasingly augmented by autonomous systems. Mr. Speaker, let me be clear, we are ready and willing to respond robustly to threats and defeat them if required.
Mr. Speaker, off the tranquil coast of Suffolk lie critical pieces of infrastructure, communications cables, electrical installations. There are alarming reports of munitions capable of creating giant tidal waves, threatening our coastal communities and indeed our nuclear facilities. Can the Secretary of State outline what steps the government is taking to truly protect the coastal waters from hostile foreign activity and safeguard our national security?
My honourable friend makes a very important point. Russian surface and subsurface activity has increased by 30%, and the first duty of any government is to protect our people. We're absolutely committed to advancing our work against hostile states and ensuring national security, and I'm sure whilst those coasts may be tranquil, underneath 24/7 there are British Royal Navy protecting both our territorial waters, our international waters and our international interests.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like me, I know the entire front bench welcomes the news of the Regulating for Growth Bill, which will enable modernisation of regulations for maritime autonomy testing and the creation of regulatory sandbox powers. Now, this is vital, Mr. Speaker, for the unmanned vessels that we need to protect our coastal waters, but defence firms like those in my constituency cannot afford unnecessary delay due to the parliamentary timetable, otherwise we risk losing ground to international competitors. So what conversations is the Department having with colleagues across government to speed up the progress of the bill through Parliament? And I am planning on asking the Leader of the House in due course.
So I couldn't agree more with the honourable member that we need to do much more to deregulate the use of all types of autonomous systems. I always drone on about drones. Maritime capability is absolutely essential. We've seen a Navy without a Navy defeat a Navy in the Black Sea. We want to be at the very forefront of this, and I encourage the honourable friend to write to the Leader House to bring this forward as quickly as possible.
Number 4, topical questions.
Call number 1, please, Mr. Speaker.
Rustain.
Mr. Speaker, with deep regret, I should inform the House that a training accident occurred in northern Iraq yesterday, in which a service personnel from the British Army has died. The family have been informed and have asked for a period of grace before further details are released. I know the thoughts of the House will be with the family and with the unit at this desperately sad time. Mr. Speaker, in this era of growing threat, hard power and strong alliances help make Britain safer. At the weekend, I was in the Shangri-La Summit in Singapore with the US Secretary of War Hegseth and Deputy Prime Minister Miles of Australia. Together, we announced the first ever AUKUS 2 pillar project, signature project. Together, we are now producing the very highest technology, sensors, and weapons systems for our underwater drones. Together, we will get these capabilities into our warfighters' hands before the end of next year.
Emma Foodie.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And firstly, can I associate myself with the remarks of the Secretary of State? The Veterans Minister joined me recently in meeting several women veterans in my constituency, where they spoke exceptionally powerfully about the specific challenges and barriers that they experience accessing appropriate support having left the armed forces. Now, the Valour programme is incredibly welcome, but I wonder whether the Secretary of State can assure me that as part of the second round of funding, whether he'll be looking at how women veterans access gender-informed services reflecting their particular needs and experiences.
I can indeed, Mr Speaker, and I pay tribute to my honourable friend's support for the successful Northumbria bid in the first round of the Valour funding. That will help cover her constituency. And when 1 in 8 of our ex-forces are female veterans, we'll ensure the veterans' strategy reflects those concerns, and we will ensure that any round 2 funding, as a result of the new application for bids, is recognised as well.
Just remind members not to walk in front when the Minister is answering the question. James Carsley, Shadow Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And can I echo the Secretary of State in respect to the sad news from Iraq, and on behalf of the opposition send our condolences to the family concerned. Very sad news indeed. Simple question for the Secretary of State. Has the Treasury signed off the Defence Investment Plan?
The honourable gentleman may not have heard me when I answered before, and I can say to him very clearly, the Prime Minister is determined that we publish the Defence Investment Plan before the NATO summit.
James Carsley.
Well, Mr Speaker, no wonder the Defence Investment Plan is so late. Labour still haven't worked out how to pay for it, Mr Speaker. But the good news is others have. Lord Robertson, former Labour Defence Secretary, said, "We cannot defend Britain with an ever-expanding welfare budget." And Tony Blair himself warned last week that by the end of this decade we could be spending more on incapacity and disability benefits than on defence. No serious country can do that. Isn't the truth that whoever becomes the next Labour Prime Minister must do one thing above all else to boost defence? Cut welfare and spend the savings on the British Armed Forces.
Mr Speaker, the honourable gentleman has brass neck. I have to say, there is no recognition of the fact that we are increasing defence spending by a record amount since the end of the Cold War. No recognition that this year the defence budget will be £11 billion greater than in his last year in government. No recognition that there are contracts in place, including the AUKUS Pillar 2 contract, which we've signed and he didn't when he was the minister responsible.
I welcome the government's commitment to defence procurement that supports British jobs. However, Mr Speaker, tens of thousands of jobs in Lancashire are reliant on fast jet production. Britain needs new jets, and we need to maintain the skills for these next generation of jets. So will the Secretary of State commit to protecting jobs, maintaining these critical skills and providing the jets that we need for our country's defence by ordering British-made Typhoons for the RAF?
This government's proud to support Typhoons. We've announced a £500 million upgrade for Typhoons, including new radar, and we've helped secure the export deal for 20 Typhoon jets to Turkey. We're continuing supporting the brilliant jobs at Wharton, Salisbury and across the United Kingdom in Typhoon production, and expand into more autonomous craft as well, supporting Typhoon for many years to come.
We still look forward to the next order, though. Dr Ben Spencer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. What is his assessment of the extra investment in defence and the extra kit Ukraine will need as a consequence of us handing money to Putin due to relaxation of oil and gas sanctions?
As the member will know, we're increasing sanctions on Russian oil. We're increasing sanctions. I entirely appreciate how the opposition has decided to depart from the principle of cross-party support to play party political games, but doesn't stop it being true. We're increasing sanctions on Russia.
Anna Dixon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I recently met with defence SMEs in Shipley. They want to recruit young talent, including engineers and programmers, for designing and building technologies used in drones. Can the Secretary of State say how we ensure that there are opportunities for young people from all backgrounds to aspire to careers in defence, and what is the government doing to invest in the skills we need to protect these isles and secure our future?
First of all, Mr Speaker, we're directing defence investment first to British firms that increase British jobs, increase apprenticeships and skills and opportunities for young people. Secondly, we're opening up recruitment to the armed forces for direct entry for those with cyber skills. The first cohort have already been recruited. They're deployed much quicker than the normal route, and the early reports from every one of their units is overwhelmingly positive, so we're moving in now to recruit the second tranche of those direct cyber recruits.
Chris Conlon.
Mr Speaker, last year almost 4,000 non-commissioned officers, an entire brigade, left the British Army. One of them, an infantryman with 4 tours of Iraq and Afghanistan, told me that the reason he was leaving was because whatever the policy says, in practice, late entry officers are almost always only employed in administrative, not combat roles. Will the Minister meet with me to explain why we are losing hundreds of our most experienced soldiers entirely unnecessarily?
Throughout my tenure, I've worked with many late entry officers in combat roles. I'll take the issue away and look into it in detail, but I'm pretty sure that's a misrepresentation of the totality of late entry officers across our armed forces in the Navy, Army and Air Force.
Nashaba Khan. Not here. Adrian Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Joint Intelligence Committee report described ecological collapse and climate breakdown as posing catastrophic and irreversible risks to UK security, including conflict, food and water insecurity, supply chain disruption and forced migration. Does the Minister agree that the destabilising impact of climate and nature crisis is one of the biggest security national risks facing Britain, and what steps is the Ministry of Defence taking to coordinate critical actions across government?
Yes, we do. We know that climate change is driving a number of increasing threats. We also know that as a department we're cutting our carbon emissions and supporting nature recovery. We do that not just because it's the right thing to do, because it increases our warfighting readiness. We know from Ukraine a diesel generator can be seen by an ISR drone many kilometres away. We know that if we continue with the use of fossil fuels, we're at a strategic disadvantage on the battlefield. That's why we continue to invest in new technology in this regard.
Murphy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Basingstoke is home to a number of vibrant and successful cadet forces, Air, Army and Sea Cadets, as well as a number of combined cadet forces at the Costello and the Vine schools. Would the Minister join me in paying tribute to these fantastic cadet forces, set out what she is doing and the government is doing to support them, and perhaps commit to a visit to meet some of the wonderful cadets in Basingstoke?
I thank the Honourable Member for highlighting the fantastic work that the cadet groups are doing in Basingstoke. They exemplify the confidence, independence and community spirit fostered by MOD cadets across the UK. We are launching the first ever National Cadets Week in October 2026 and crucially developing a Cadets Action Plan to expand the cadet forces. Firstly, by improving the offer to our wonderful adult volunteers to ensure that they have the right support and resources, including infrastructure, and making sure that we are selling the offer to our young people for the amazing things they can get from the cadets. And I would be happy to visit when my diary allows.
Rebecca Paul.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. There were concerning reports at the weekend about GCAP being delayed. We know the funding for Edwing agreed in April is due to run out this month. Can he guarantee that a new deal will be signed and in place before the end of June?
I appreciate the Honourable LA's question. We support GCAP as a government and will continue to do so in the months and years ahead.
Paul Davis.
Mr Speaker, across the country, young people build confidence, independence and learn the value of community engagement through participation in cadet groups. Thongsbridge Army cadets in my constituency demonstrate why cadets are such an important part of our community, and I thank the young people and their leaders for their dedication and hard work. Can the Minister outline in more detail what measures the government is taking to support groups such as Thongsbridge Army cadets?
I thank the honourable member for rightly highlighting the wonderful work that the Fongsbridge Army Cadets do. As he rightly says, they exemplify the wonderful things that young people can gain in the MOD cadets across the UK, as well as in his constituency. So I can confirm we're launching the first ever National Cadets Week in October 2026 and developing a Cadets Action Plan to expand the cadet forces, firstly by improving the offer to our amazing adult volunteers, ensuring they have the right resources, including infrastructure, and making sure we rightly communicate to our young people the amazing things they can gain from the cadets.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I just associate myself with the words of the Chair of the Defence Committee earlier on the need to get to 3%? And can I just ask the Secretary of State, given that we are one of only 2 countries in the European continent to run a nuclear programme, does he agree with me that when you knock out the nuclear programme, we're actually spending more like 1.7, 1.8% on our conventional defence? And that compares rather more with Spain than it does with countries like Poland or Estonia that are spending more like 4 or 5. Does he therefore agree that we need to uplift immediately?
Mr. Speaker, we must spend more, we must spend faster, we will, as the Prime Minister has said. And on our nuclear deterrent, I'm proud that this is a government that is putting £6 billion in this Parliament to increase the productivity of our submarine building, to raise levels of production and to increase the pace of the build of the submarines in future.
I welcome that since the government took office, defence funding has increased by more than 7.5%. Ukraine maintaining its sovereignty against Russia is vital for European security and therefore British security. I therefore ask the Minister if the government is committed to increasing the proportion of defence spending going to Ukraine to align with the increase in defence spending more generally.
Ukraine is doing a valiant job holding back the illegal Russian invasion. There's £4.5 billion of UK military support gone to Ukraine and a total commitment of £21.8 billion. It's really important it goes to the right place, and that's why we've reviewed where that money is going to make sure that the maximum amount of impact can be derived from every pound that goes to Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following the recent challenges deploying HMS Dragon to the Middle East at short notice, will the Defence Readiness Bill mentioned in the SDR urgently review how more of our Type 45 destroyers can be made more readily available to defend against aerial attacks?
Yes.
O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When the Secretary of State orders those Typhoons from Lancashire, will he commit to ensuring that they are fuelled by SAF made in northern Lincolnshire?
We've set out our intention to increase the amount of sustainable aviation fuel that the RAF uses. Far from it being a sign of weakness, it's a sign of our increasing security and sovereignty over our fuel supply, recognising the changing world that we live in, making sure that our RAF will continue to fly whatever the constraints on fuel in the future.
John Lamb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently visited Wiltshire Cadets in Old Sarum, and I very much welcome what the Minister said about Cadets Week. Would she ensure, though, that all the schools, particularly in pride in place areas like the one in Salisbury, would be made aware of the transformational opportunities of attending cadets? Because I think that would be a great way of expanding the uptake, which I'm sure she's aiming for.
He makes a very good point, and I am communicating with the Department for Education because it's absolutely vital that we communicate the amazing things that cadets can do to complement the education delivered in schools.
Lorraine Beavers.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the government's announcement to select Blackpool and Fylde College as a Defence Technical Excellence College. This will build a skilled workforce and offer stable employment and opportunities in my constituency. But without a Typhoon jet order of our own, we risk losing the ability to build our own faster jets. This is about our national security. Germany, Italy and Spain understand.
One of us is going to sit down. It's not going to be me. Can just gently say, I totally agree. We do need this order. Absolutely. Lancashire MPs are fully committed. But when we're on topics, we've got to shorten the original question down. I'm sure the Minister will have got the drift of why we need the order.
We're proud to support Typhoon, and I was proud to be in her constituency to unveil the Defence Technical Excellence College. She has some brilliant students undertaking amazing training that will give them the skills to work in BA systems, producing Typhoons for our allies and potentially other craft in the future. We'll continue to support Lancashire and their aerospace sector.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Thursday, I was on the water with King's Lynn Sea Cadets and Royal Marine Cadets. As the Minister will know, the Army and Air Force cadets are funded wholly by the Ministry of Defence. But what provision will the Royal Navy make in order to fund vital equipment such as the new boats that those cadets need?
I appreciate he understands the unique funding arrangements that the Sea Cadets have, and they are rightly proud of their history and traditions that make it so. I completely take his point and understand that we must do what we can to support them in getting the kit, the training and the volunteers needed to deliver and keep delivering their fantastic activity.
Speaker, as my ministerial friends know, MBDA, who make the Storm Shadow missiles used in Ukraine, have doubled their workforce since 2010 in my constituency of Stevenage and are investing £4.8 million annually in training. So what more can the Secretary of State do to support businesses in the training and resilience of their workforces?
We set out in the Defence Industrial Strategy a £182 million package to invest in skills, not only supporting people entering defence for the very first time, creating a lifetime of opportunity ahead of them, but also supporting people retraining throughout their skills. The companies in Stevenage are great examples of using that training money well. I'm very happy talking to him about how we can go further with that.
Mr. Speaker, RAF Benson Primary School in my constituency is struggling with a temporary reduction in its roles as a result of the scrapping of the Puma fleet. Will he meet with me to discuss how that school can continue to thrive into the future as we anticipate the new medium helicopter coming online?
One of our ministers will meet with the honourable gentleman.
Mr. McAllister.
Speaker, this government's plan for Defence Technical Excellence Colleges in the east and west of Scotland will give the young people of my West and Bartonshire constituency training opportunities. Can I ask the Minister if the Scottish Government has responded or agreed to match our ambition with their share of funding for our colleges?
Thank him for his question. Myself and the Scotland Secretary wrote to the Scottish Government now a number of months ago. We've still had no reply to our offer of having 2 DTECs in Scotland. I hope that the Scottish National Party MPs present will be able to hurry on their Scottish Government to give us and their young people in Scotland the DTECs that they deserve.
Mr. Speaker, now the SDR acknowledges that a significant proportion of the reserves work within the NHS, and if they were to be deployed, there would be significant issues. Given Defence Medical Services and the NHS have to work together, can the government set out what plans they are putting in place for this?
Good question.
Our work to reinvigorate the strategic reserve is absolutely vital, and it is an issue that has not previously been thought about in the detail that it needed. This government is utterly committed to making sure the strategic reserve is ready to meet the demands that may be placed on it, including, as she says, workforce implications.
My constituent David Hewitt was dismissed from the RAF just days before the Armed Forces lifted the ban on LGBT service personnel. He was dismissed simply for being gay. He is still, years later, waiting for the restoration of his rank and financial redress. What can the Minister do to expedite this process? And does she agree with me on this first day of Pride Month how unacceptable that legacy is?
I completely echo his sentiment at how unacceptable our LGBT service personnel were treated. As he will know, the LGBT FRS scheme has made significant progress, but has not yet completed. If he's able to write to me with details of his constituents, I will look into it as a matter of urgency.
For the best objection.
Speaker, last month the government announced that it has finally taken delivery of the 47th F-35B, thus completing our initial tranche of the order. However, that's not strictly true because 2 of those planes, ZM177 and ZM179, are currently stranded in the Azores and have been there since March the 9th. That's nearly 3 months. Can the Minister explain why the planes are stranded there and who holds responsibility for completing their delivery? Is it Lockheed Martin or is it the Ministry of Defence?
I think for a gentleman who has so many PQs, I'm surprised he's not kept up with those 2 planes. I'll be sure to write to him, giving him the full details, or get another PQ, in which he will be able to inform himself of the information there.
Mr. Speaker, Bovington Camp in South Dorset has a long list of outstanding repairs. Pothole-ridden streets, persistent fly tipping and no working street lights on King George V Road, just to name a few. So will the Minister work with me to ensure that the Defence Infrastructure Organisation carries out much-needed repairs and fulfils their most basic maintenance responsibilities?
Bovington's an important base for me, and I recognise the concerns that the honourable gentleman mentions. I'll be very happy meeting him to discuss how we can resolve those.
Testament.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the Minister could tell me the date on which the very first documents were closed relating to the Chinook air disaster, and why it is that ministers seem to have absolutely no overall oversight or responsibility or accountability when those decisions are made to close documents to the public.
I would gently say I will write to her with specific information. I know she's put questions into my office about this issue as well, but I would just gently say that there are some very important provisions that govern these documents, including the protection of personal data. I would just like to state for the record how seriously I am taking this issue. I have the deepest sympathies for the families of the Chinook crash, and I understand they have their search for justice. I cannot comment in too much detail, but I would like to state I'm very sympathetic.
The government's strategic defence recommended an increase in the Army Reserve by 20%, but at the very same time, the government is closing Grantham's Prince William of Gloucester Barracks, which trains 70% of all Army reservists in the country. Will the Defence Secretary review this decision so that we have the capacity to train new Army Reservist recruits?
I'm sure he will understand that decisions about which activity is conducted where are taken across the UK, but I will write to him with further detail about the barracks he mentions.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. Investment in the UK defence sector, especially defence SMEs, is desperately needed. What will the government do to build and drive forward investment for defence procurement SMEs?
Well, thank him for his question and for championing SMEs. We've established the Defence Office of Small Business Growth that stood up at the start of this year and is supporting dozens of SMEs already. We are also increasing direct spend with SMEs and reducing contracting time to enable SMEs to bid for more defence contracts.
Jim Alistair.
Tomorrow is the 32nd anniversary of the Chinook disaster, when we lost so many of our high-ranking anti-terrorist security experts. And yet the families of those individuals still crave the truth. With a saga where the department claimed for years it was pilot error, only to having to reverse that decision. And yet we still don't have the truth. We still have documents locked away for 100 years, and we have a situation where families are crying out for the truth. They hear talk about Hillsborough law and duty of candour. Why is the government continuing to cover up on this issue, particularly on the question of mechanical unfitness?
He's absolutely right. Tomorrow marks a very sad anniversary, and I'm sure he'll be aware that members of my own corps sadly lost their lives in that crash. Myself and my colleague, we have met with the families, and I have heard their challenges that they have faced. I am very sympathetic to them. I would gently say that where documents are closed for personal information reasons, that is something that we do have to respect. There are other people here, but I would just like to say I'm very sympathetic, and I continue to meet with them as required.
Final question.
Mr. Speaker, Israel's illegal invasion of Lebanon is continuing unabated. Millions have left their homes and millions of refugees have fled to the north. Minister, it's happening all over again. People are suffering, civilians are dying. What is he therefore doing to suspend all military cooperation with Israel so they stop the Gazification of Lebanon?
Mr. Speaker, we're urging both sides to scale down their activity, to respect the ceasefire, and for that to be part of the current ceasefire agreement in the wider Middle East, to be translated into a permanent peace, including between Israel and the Lebanese Hezbollah.
Questions? Let from bench change over. We come to a business statement. I'd like to acknowledge there has been significant public interest in the case involving the murder of Henry Novak. The case is legitimate interest to the House, and I know that sentencing will take place today. My understanding and agreement is that the Government will bring forward a statement on this matter tomorrow. It is for the same reason that the statement is not forthcoming, and I look favourably on attempts to bring the issues raised by this case before the House by other means if not. I now call the Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, with permission, I'll make a short business statement about the remainder of this week's business. The business for tomorrow, Tuesday the 2nd of June, will be Committee of the Whole House of the Armed Forces Bill. The business for Wednesday the 3rd of June will be a general debate on the Government's response to the humble address on the appointment of Lord Mandelson. The business for Thursday the 4th of June will be a general debate on Pride Month, and I will announce further business in the usual way on Thursday.
Shadow Leader of the House, Jessie Norman.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Leader very much for that business update and also for the news of the debate on Wednesday. That will be an opportunity for backbench members to put debates and matters in the record. But for scrutiny of the government, actually, by far the best way is to have the questions that we're about to follow this discussion. And I'm afraid, Mr Speaker, that the Mandelson files were released publicly only at 2 p.m. and 1,500 pages. No backbench member can be expected to have mastered this. Since those files could have been put in the public domain at 9:30 this morning, Mr Speaker, could I just register with the Leader that I think, as he recognises the importance of parliamentary scrutiny, we're all owed a slightly higher quality of scrutiny than this has received.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I do acknowledge what the Right Honourable Gentleman is saying, but that's precisely why I just announced that we're having Wednesday's debate, that it will be a general debate, and I'm sure my Right Honourable friend, the Chief Secretary, the Prime Minister, will respond to some of those points shortly.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise only really to pass on the frustrations from these benches and from my residents that the important legislation planned for Wednesday will now be delayed, and that the incredibly important improvements to rail services that our residents are calling out for will be further delayed again. Parkinson's law suggested that work expands to fill the space available for its completion. Can I suggest Mandelson's law, which is when you appoint him to your government, his scandals will expand to fill the time available for their discussion. Can I ask the Minister whether he agrees that this scandal will be the defining legacy of the Starmer Premiership and shows clearly how the change and service agenda promised after the scandal and sleaze of the last Tory government were as empty words as suggesting that proper process was followed in his appointment?
Mr Speaker, I'm not going to respond to those empty words. I am going to say that I expect to announce the rescheduling of remaining stages of the Railways Bill in my statement on Thursday, and I anticipate that the House will be able to consider that stage of the bill during next week's business.
We now come to statement. Secretary Darren Jones.
With permission, Mr Speaker, I would like to update the House on the Government's response to the humble address of the 4th of February. Before I do, I think it's important for all of us to reflect again on the impact that this debate will have on the victims of Jeffrey Epstein. Members across the House will be aware of the truly horrific crimes he committed against countless women and girls, and we hold them in our thoughts when discussing these issues again today. Mr Speaker, the Government has today laid the second tranche of documents. These were laid before the House in advance of this statement and are now on gov.uk for the public to see. The documents we are publishing today are one of the largest government publications ever laid before this House. This disclosure process has been wide-ranging, costing the Cabinet Office alone over £1 million. As the House knows, this was an official-led process, with judgments made by senior officials, and I am grateful for the careful work they have undertaken right up until today's publication. Whilst the first tranche dealt with Peter Mandelson's appointment, withdrawal and severance, this second tranche responds to the parts of the motion which requested communications and documents concerning his appointment and vetting, as well as messages between Peter Mandelson and ministers, special advisers and civil servants,
in the month prior to and throughout the duration of his appointment. Mr. Speaker, I recognise that the House will need sufficient time to review today's tranche in full, given the size of the publication. As we have just heard from the Leader of the House, that is why I have secured government time on Wednesday for a subsequent general debate, so that there is an opportunity for members to ask further questions after today's statement. To inform that debate and for clarity and accountability, I draw the House's attention to the methodology set out in the publication today. This explains in detail how the government undertook the disclosure process. I will not repeat that in full here today, Mr. Speaker, but I will make reference to a number of areas that I know the House has expressed an interest in previously. First, on redactions. In line with the motion, over 300 individual documents were referred under a process agreed between the Government and the Intelligence and Security Committee. I can confirm that no material has been redacted on the grounds of prejudice to national security or international relations without the committee's approval. For clarity, all redacted material agreed with the ISC is labelled in the bundles today with 3 asterisks. Outside of this arrangement, this process does not change the important and well-established constitutional principle that national security and international relations judgments are ultimately for the government. I once again express my thanks to the Intelligence and Security Committee for their engagement in this process. Further limited redactions have been made outside of the ISC process in respect of information that relates to junior officials' names, contact details like telephone numbers and email addresses, the personal or commercially sensitive data of third parties not relevant to the motion, and where relevant, legal professional privilege. I would also like to confirm that no reductions have been made to references to Global Council, other than to protect the identity of individuals who worked there and are not themselves public figures. Officials have sought to be transparent in the material where the individual is a Global Council employee. No redactions have been made to references to Palantir and Anduril outside of the scope of the existing ISC redactions process, and no clear references to current or former UK politicians have been redacted on the basis of their being third parties. I can also confirm to the House that no government minister or special advisor has determined any of the redactions themselves. The redaction process has been overseen by Cabinet Office officials and, where relevant, in agreement with the ISC. The Cabinet Office Humble Address team has taken advice, in addition to this, from an independent King's Counsel, including reviewing the methodological approach followed by officials and acting on that to inform their work. This has helped ensure that the government is confident that its approach is compliant with the Humble Address and the government's legal obligations. These additional targeted redactions made outside of the agreed ISC process have been made in line with the Freedom of Information Act, the Ministerial Code, and the resolutions on ministerial accountability passed by both houses in 1997. This is important, Mr. Speaker, because it goes to the question of whether the government has complied fully with the Humble Address. That question should be answered in the context of the established rules and precedents that relate to humble addresses. If these rules were not relevant, then the Humble Address would have required extensive additional detail on the face of the motion dealing with these procedural issues. However, I do recognise the level of interest in the House in respect of these non-national security and international relations related redactions. And so, on the recommendation of the Intelligence and Security Committee, I can confirm that the Honourable Member for North Dorset, the Chair of the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee, has reviewed our approach to third-party redactions this morning. He has confirmed that we have applied the methodology set out in the document and that, in his view, the redactions are sensible, reasonable and proportionate. I thank the Intelligence and Security Committee for this recommendation and the Honourable Member for the additional reassurance he has provided on this point. Mr. Speaker, as the House is aware, the Metropolitan Police has also asked the Government to withhold some material in scope of the motion, which they considered could be prejudicial to their ongoing criminal investigation or any subsequent prosecution. This request remains in place, and I'm very grateful again to the Chair of the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee, with whom we have also shared this information in order to provide additional accountability of the Government's actions. I hope that members appreciate the need not to prejudice the investigation and understand that I will not be able to answer questions about certain documents which have been withheld. no responsible government would wish to undermine a criminal investigation and put at risk the justice that it seeks, and I'm sure the House will share this position. I can, however, Mr. Speaker, confirm that this material does include questions put to Peter Mandelson by the Prime Minister's then Chief of Staff and Peter Mandelson's responses. In addition, a small number of documents have been withheld at the request of the police, which fall broadly into the following categories. Firstly, national security vetting information. Secondly, conflict of interest process material. And thirdly, relevant internal correspondence with Peter Mandelson. Such information will, of course, be published at the conclusion of the investigation or at the point at which it would no longer be prejudicial to the police investigation to do so. Mr. Speaker, the documents published in the first and second tranches contain the entirety of the documents the government has available for disclosure, except those few documents I have just referred to in relation to the Metropolitan Police. Members will no doubt have questions about what might be perceived to be missing messages and meeting notes, which I would like to address in turn. On messages that some might expect to be included, I can confirm that we have conducted multiple rounds of discovery from relevant ministers, special advisors and officials in line with the motion passed by the House. This has involved requesting searches of email, messaging platforms such as WhatsApp, and other related communication services on both work and personal devices. However, the House should note that some messages may not have been backed up where devices may have been changed, or disappearing messages were turned on for reasonable and permitted reasons, including before the dismissal of Peter Mandelson or the passing of the humble address, myself included. I do recall, Mr. Speaker, having some limited exchanges with Peter Mandelson over WhatsApp, including those I have already discussed in the media. But these conversations did not involve transacting government business and were in line with official guidance on the use of non-corporate communications channels at the time. Mr. Speaker, I also share the view put by the Intelligence and Security Committee to the House that there are lessons for the civil service to learn in respect of better note-keeping, archiving, and the use of appropriate levels of secure IT systems in the future. The government has already committed to a review of the use of non-corporate communications channels, the terms of reference for which we will shortly publish, taking into account the concerns that have been raised in this House and the 2 tranches of documents we have published in response to the humble address. I will, of course, keep the House updated as we progress that work. Mr. Speaker, I will now turn to the material relating to Peter Mandelson's national security vetting process. I can confirm that the vetting process summary and recommendation that was put by UK security vetting officials to the Foreign Office has been shared with the Intelligence and Security Committee. This was shared for the purpose of agreeing redactions as part of the agreed process so that it can be published when we are in a position to do so. What hasn't been shared is the highly sensitive personal data inputs collected during the interview process. These could, for example, relate to how much money an individual might have in a particular account or who a person may have had a personal relationship with in the past. Mr. Speaker, if those participating in the vetting process cannot trust that the information they feed into that process is confidential, it will harm the integrity of the whole system. Anything less than full candor would be hugely damaging and be profoundly negative for our national security. This would be felt by this and future governments and ultimately by the British people. As such, sharing this data for any person undergoing developed vetting would undermine the very basis of our national security vetting system. Mr. Speaker, this is the 10th update to the House on this matter that I have provided. And with the exception of the small number of documents that are withheld at the request of the police, which we intend to publish when the police are content for us to do so, the government now considers that it has duly discharged the duties set out in the humble address. I will, however, return to the House for the general debate on Wednesday to provide a further opportunity for colleagues to ask questions. And on that basis, Mr. Speaker, I commend the statement to the House.
Opposition Secretary of State, Alex Burkhardt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement. Though if the story in the Times is to be believed, he may be positioning himself to be the chief successor to the Prime Minister. I also thank him for giving me advance sight of the material that was published today, which I was fortunate enough to see this morning. However, it is very important to put on record that only a very few members of this House were able to see it this morning. It was available at 9:30, and yet it was only published at 2 o'clock. And yet here we are today with honourable members of the House not having had a chance to read it, and yet being expected to ask the right honourable gentleman questions. Now, I know the response will come that we're going to have a general debate on Wednesday. But as honourable members opposite will know, in a general debate, if the Minister chooses not to take interventions, there is no scrutiny at all. You know, this is, at worst, obfuscation. This is an attempt to deny scrutiny in a way which is unnecessary. The documents should have been published at 9:30 this morning in advance of this statement. It was on the news. The case of Peter Mandelson's appointment remains of the utmost national importance, simply because it touches on national security and on the Prime Minister's honesty, integrity and competence. In the material before us today, I want to make two basic points. The first is about disclosure, and the second is about the process by which Peter Mandelson was appointed. On disclosure, although we have a huge number of documents, it is clear that very many are missing. Some have been withheld, some have been lost, and it's clear that some have probably been destroyed. Because of the approach the government is taking, however, it is impossible for honourable members to know which documents fall into which category. We're told that the Metropolitan Police has requested that certain documents be retained, but the government has refused to tell us which documents are being retained. I respect the fact that the right honourable gentleman has told us about 3 broad categories now. This is progress. We did ask for those categories some time ago. We were told we couldn't have them, but it turns out we can have them. We know that there is no good legal basis for the government not to disclose to this House which documents are being withheld. The government should tell us. Indeed, it would be possible for it to disclose those documents to the ISC, or indeed to certain members of the House on Privy Council terms. Again, this is obfuscation. It is an unnecessary attempt to defer scrutiny or deny it. And the humble address did not allow for the government to redefine the request in this way. If the government wishes to retain documents because the Met Police have asked, it should come back to the House and change the terms of the humble address. It has not done that, and consequently, it risks being in contempt. Some ministers have duly handed over their WhatsApp messages. It's clear that some have not. Are we to believe that there was no WhatsApp exchange at all between the Prime Minister and Peter Mandelson? We know that there were, because it's been reported in the press, and yet those messages, the messages that were reported in the press do not appear in the release today. It is clear that some messages have gone missing. It is also the case that in all of these documents, the Prime Minister's presence is almost non-existent. Almost non-existent. Despite the fact that he was appointing a man to be head of our most senior mission, we have almost nothing in his name. It is as though somehow he appointed Peter Mandelson as ambassador without leaving any documentary trace of that decision at all. It really beggars belief, Mr. Speaker. We take for example, the Secretary of State for DCIT, well known to be a friend and ally of Mandelson. He appears to have submitted a nil return on his WhatsApp messages. I hope that the honourable gentleman will tell us why. Was it that there were never any messages? This seems unlikely. Was it that those messages have been deleted? The House has a right to know. The House has a right to know, in each case, whether information has gone missing or whether it has not been handed over. We know that Peter Mandelson has refused to hand over his phone. It's in the document. But we know that he was asked to give over his phone on the 31st of March, sometime after the humble address. He's declined to do so, and this is just simply not acceptable that the government should allow this to pass without some sort of pushback. The government has, within its power, the opportunity to take legal action to recover the exit payment it gave to Peter Mandelson if he is not playing ball with the humble address. There's then the matter of redactions. Acres and acres of white space. Constellation of asterisks. Perhaps all too appropriate for a Labour document, Mr. Speaker. It is clear from the reports in the press that the ISC has had serious concerns about the redaction process. I listened to what the right honourable gentleman said, and I will listen with interest to what members of the committee say in a moment. There are a huge number of redactions under the heading third party. On what grounds have these redactions been made? For example, on page 251 of volume 3, Mandelson refers to someone who is currently staying with him in government property. This name is redacted. Why has it been redacted? Why can the House not be told who was staying in government property with the ambassador? On the national security vetting material, it seems, once again, that the government is happier to provide The Guardian with more information than it is prepared to provide to Parliament. Preparation of the security document for publication appeared in recess, leaked by someone in government who was familiar with it. And then we've seen that The Guardian has achieved from multiple sources that there were concerns raised by the vetting agency about Peter Mandelson's foreign contacts with a Chinese minister, with Oleg Deripaska, with Tamer Heyman, and so on. Multiple sources, and yet we are being asked to believe that this information was only seen by a tiny handful of people within government. Someone, somewhere, is not being frank with us. Now, if we had time, Mr. Speaker, and we will have time on Wednesday, we could talk about the concerning information about Chagos here. We could talk about the fact that Peter Mandelson, after he had been appointed, asked whether he could do paid work in Shanghai, on a private basis. We could talk about the fact that Peter Mandelson wrote to the then Foreign Secretary saying, if you were indeed minded to appoint me, I would make sure you never regret it. But the truth is that we must return once again to the process by which Peter Mandelson was appointed. And everything in the documents today show that the Prime Minister did not follow the instructions he was given by the then Cabinet Secretary on the 11th of August 2024. He was told to get security vetting done before the appointment was confirmed, and this the Prime Minister did not do. And he was asked to do that because the Prime Minister had been provided with a due diligence document by the Cabinet Office which said that Peter Mandelson had an ongoing friendship with Epstein after Epstein had been sent to prison, the fact that Mandelson had been a director of a Russian defense company which had supplied arms to Putin during Putin's invasion of Crimea, and the fact that he had maintained unhealthy business relations in China. And yet, despite this, the Prime Minister did not get the security vetting done before he made the appointment. He went ahead and made it anyway, and then the rest of the system was scrabbling around afterwards to try and make up for this error. But it was his error. It was clear that due diligence was not followed. It is a failure that is visible from space. It is a failure that will define this Prime Minister's premiership. It is a failure that will be written as his political epitaph.
Secretary Jones.
Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable gentleman for his questions. I think there were three broad questions, one on access to the documents today, second on what documents are available or not, and the third on the redactions process. In terms of access to the documents, Mr. Speaker, as I said to the House in the urgent question before the recess, I've been very mindful of the fact that given the significant number of documents being published today, that we wanted to create as much time as possible for the House to scrutinise them and to be able to ask the government questions. I agree that had I published these documents 45 minutes before standing up to give a statement for 45 minutes, that would have been insufficient in the circumstances. And I hope that he welcomes the lengths that I and the government have gone to, not just to provide these in advance today to himself, but also the Leader of the Opposition, the chairs of the relevant select committees, and other stakeholders, but also by publishing them at a much earlier time compared to normal before the debate today, and then securing a general debate on Wednesday. In respect of the documents that are available, as I said in my statement, Mr. Speaker, this tranche plus the first tranche of documents represent the entirety of the documents that the government has available for disclosure, except for those that have been made available to the Metropolitan Police. He has invited me to list those documents given to the Metropolitan Police. As I've said from the dispatch box before, Mr. Speaker, I'm acting on the advice of the Metropolitan Police in not being able to do that, but I'm pleased that he welcomes the commitment we have secured from them to give a little bit more shape to that today with the categories of documents that are being held. I would remind the honourable gentleman, and indeed the House, that we have also shared the documents directly with the Chair of the Public Administration Committee so that there is an additional check and balance within Parliament without being able to share these documents more widely until the Met Police tell us. He also asked me, Mr. Speaker, about notification of the Prime Minister's decision to appoint Peter Mandelson as ambassador. I would refer him to the first tranche and the document from his Principal Private Secretary in number 10 communicating that decision both to the Foreign Office and to the Palace. And then finally, he asked me about the redactions process, which I think I set out in detail in my statement, Mr. Speaker, which was predominantly with the Intelligence and Security Committee where it relates to national security or international relations, and then second, to non-national security redactions in line with established process and precedent, with the additional check provided this morning, again by the Chair of the Public Administration Committee, in relation to third parties, for which he has confirmed, I understand it, that he's happy with the process the government has followed.
Dame Emily Thornbury, Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And can I begin by thanking the Minister for giving me access to the papers at 9:30 this morning. Is it right, though, that amongst the 1,500 pages of documents released today, there is no written evidence of any mitigations being put in place, either to minimise Peter Mandelson's conflicts of interest, or more importantly, to reduce the risk to our national security that vetting had flagged? Due to his close connections with Russian oligarchs, senior Chinese officials, retired Israeli spy masters, and a debt of £1 million to buy shares in a secretive Israeli startup. Can the Chief Secretary please tell us, are we going to see such documents later because the police have got them, or do they just not exist at all?
Can I thank the Honourable Lady for her question? And without inadvertently being able to name specific documents, I'm afraid the best I can say to her today in relation to those potential conflicts of interest is that, as I made clear in my statement, that nature of document has been made relevant from the Metropolitan Police's perspective in terms of their criminal investigation.
Lisa Smart, Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for advance sight of his statement, as well as members of the ISC and the member for North Dorset for their work on this matter. I want to acknowledge, again, the women and girls who found the courage to come forward about the abuse they endured at the hands of rich and powerful men. As we continue to discuss this, we must remember that those women are owed justice. When Peter Mandelson was appointed, UK security vetting advice was overridden. The then FCDO Permanent Secretary suggested that he was subject to constant pressure, and there's a line in today's files suggesting that senior people had expressed interest that the vetting process goes smoothly. Given the Minister's repeated assurances that there was no pressure from government relating to vetting, what does the Minister think that line refers to? We now know that Cabinet Ministers were privately praising and flattering Mandelson from before his appointment all the way to after his dismissal. Senior ministers showed a staggering lack of judgment. Could the Chief Secretary explain why so much business relating to one of the most controversial public appointments in recent years appears to have been conducted over WhatsApp? Private, informal and outside the official record, government by WhatsApp, which the Lib Dems have continually called for an end to, must end, because informal messaging outside official channels creates accountability gaps that should trouble us all. Does the Chief Secretary agree that government by WhatsApp must come to an end? Documents released today display concerning evidence that Peter Mandelson lobbied ministers on behalf of his clients. This would appear to be a serious breach of the Code of Conduct for the other place. Yet an initial reading of the files seems to suggest that many ministers were pliant and responded warmly to him. Could the Minister confirm if any ministers reported their concerns about this seemingly egregious lobbying? The government has outlined its plans for the removal of peerages bill, and at first glance it's a narrow and woefully unambitious bill that completely fails to rise to the moment. Could the Minister outline what it will take for the government to make meaningful reforms to the second chamber? Senior Cabinet Ministers asked Mandelson for advice on a range of issues, despite many of these issues falling outside the scope of his role. Issues of how we run this country stretch far beyond this scandal. The Ministerial Code, which should strongly inform the conduct of those who hold the highest offices in the land, continues to exist as guidance rather than the law. Ministers who breach it face no legal consequences. The Prime Minister can choose whether or not to act on the findings of independent advisers, and this means accountability is optional, and it's far from clear what consequences follow when rules are broken. Will the government now use this moment to bring forward legislation to enshrine the Ministerial Code in law?
Secretary Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Lady invites me in her first question to comment on the intent of conversations had between people other than myself. I'm sure the House will understand that all I can do at the dispatch box is refer to the documents disclosed in the bundle, given I was not privy to those conversations. She asked me a number of questions about the use of non-corporate communications channels. The guidance is very clear that non-corporate communications channels can be used, but where government is being transacted, the decision then needs to be recorded on official government channels. Nonetheless, WhatsApp has been used extensively, which has raised a number of questions for the government to consider, which we will do as part of our review of the use of non-corporate communications channels, the terms of reference for which I'll be announcing very shortly. She then asked me about the Peerages Bill, which of course was confirmed in the King's speech recently, which we will be bringing forward in due course. We share the ambition to use this as a piece of legislation to modernise the House of Lords in respect of peerages who have brought the House into disrepute. And she asked me again about putting the ministerial code on a statutory footing. And as we've exchanged a number of times across the dispatch box, I would just point to the fact that the changes this government has already made have proven to be effective, given a number of ministers have had to resign.
Chair of the JCNS, Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think any of these cases that are clearly a real risk to national security should alarm everyone around this House. I think back to some of the questions, Mr. Speaker, recall that I put to then Prime Minister Johnson about his relationship with Alexander Lebedev, for example. But hearing about the case of Oleg Deripaska with George Osborne and, of course, Peter Mandelson as well, and these other characters, as has been set out, is deeply concerning. The point I want to just land on is about the non-corporate communications channels and the IT systems. And I'm delighted to hear that the government is actually reviewing this. But it is a matter of urgency because it has become the norm, really, for civil servants and for those in government, previous governments as well, to use likes of WhatsApp as the normal operating system. When will that review be published?
Can I thank my honourable friend for his question? The first part of his question, I think, goes to the point I've made in my statement about the importance that the developed vetting interviews must be allowed to be done in full confidence, because we do need to ensure that when people are joining the government in that DV interview, that they are fully transparent with the government about any relationships they may have with individuals. In relation to the review and non-corporate communications channels, I'm hoping to be able to announce the terms of reference very shortly.
Sir Edward Lee, the Father of the House.
As far as the House of Commons generally is concerned, this whole statement is fairly meaningless because it's impossible to question on the hundreds of pages on the basis of reading documents for a few minutes. So will the Minister undertake, when he opens this debate, because so many of these general debates, frankly, are damp squibs, will he undertake actually to answer every single question put to him by that time? And I see he's nodding, that's very helpful. In my experience, these scandals are always made much worse, not by the original scandal, but by any sense of covering up. So I'm sure the Minister will want to be completely open. And therefore, listening to the opposition spokesman, it's strange that the Prime Minister seems to have so little involvement in this whole affair. I'm reminded of the wartime film, The Man Who Never Was. Does this sum up this premiership, The Man Who Never Was?
Secretary Jones.
I look forward to engaging with the right honourable gentleman in the general debate on Wednesday, where, of course, I commit to the House to do my best to answer questions that are put to me. In respect of the Prime Minister's communications, I would just point out to the House that Prime Ministers don't sit at computers sending emails from Outlook. They have officials who action their decisions on their behalf, which is what is represented in the disclosure.
Rachel Musk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It seems that Mr. Mandelson's business interests permeated every aspect of government. This afternoon we are to debate the health bill, of which we'll be debating the federated data platform, of which clearly Palantir, a client of Peter Mandelson, will have a specific interest written, hardwired into the bill. And we are expected to vote on that without seeing the full documentation and having time to digest it. So can he set out exactly what the relationship was between Mr. Mandelson and Mr. Teal, and if that was disclosed in the interview process?
Secretary Jones.
I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, I'm not here at the dispatch box to speak on behalf of Mr. Mandelson, and I was not in the developed vetting interview process, nor have I seen that information. So I'm afraid I can't answer the specific questions the Honourable Lady asks me. What I would, though, do is point her to the relevant comments in my statement, where the government has gone to lengths to ensure that references to Palantir have not been disclosed in the document in line with normal commercial process, given the level of interest and respect of that company here in the House.
Sir Pakak Simon Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first may I, through the Chief Secretary, thank all of the officials of the Cabinet Office who dealt with this in a very thorough, professional and, as far as I'm concerned, very courteous way, and for that I am grateful. Casting forward, it's probably perfectly correct that a Prime Minister should be able to make a political appointment to an ambassador's position. But there seem to be two key lessons that need to be learned here, and I wonder if the Chief Secretary could say a word or two on both. The first is that vetting should be, as a matter of course, conducted prior to making public an announcement of appointment. The second is that there does seem to be confusion, and the earlier pages of Volume 1 published today indicate this, as to what weight and status being either a member of the Privy Council, the House of Lords, a former member of the Cabinet, gives to what type of vetting is required. Can you assure the House that that key lesson has been learned and that very clear direction has been given to those who are charged with that important and sensitive job, know precisely how to do it, when to do it, and to make sure that there is a level playing field as far as the applicant is concerned?
Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I again thank the honourable gentleman for his support as Chair of the Public Administration Committee in providing oversight on behalf of Parliament of the government's processes. The first question in relation to security clearance being concluded before announcement, he is right. That is something that the government has learned as part of this process, and that policy has already been changed. The second question he asked me, Mr. Speaker, is represented in this bundle by there being an uncertainty about how existing developed vetting policy applies to those who may be a member of the Privy Council and or a member of the House of Lords, given that ministers are not put through the DV process, because that would be an undemocratic interference of the electorate in a democratic process, which could be overturned by unelected civil servants. The documents show that the government came to the right conclusion that Peter Mandelson should go through DV clearance, even though he was a member of the House of Lords and a Privy Councillor. But the documents do show that there was some uncertainty about that, and I agree with him that we should now strengthen the guidance to make sure that that's clear in the future.
Stella Crease.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The challenge for all of our constituents is that every time this subject comes up, they cannot shake the sense that Peter Mandelson's business interests hang like a grubby layer across decision-making in this government. And I know the Minister will want to challenge that and the concern that his behaviour was a symptom rather than the cause of the problem that we face. When we were last in this chamber discussing this matter, I asked the Minister explicitly about the Adrian Fulford review on the 27th of April, and he assured me that the outcome of the investigation into the vetting process would be completed within 3 to 4 weeks. It is now past his own deadline. He will understand the concern that our constituents may have, that frankly there may be more to come. Can you reassure me that that review is going to be published and what's going to be in it?
Secretary Jones.
The Honourable Lady is right to pull me up, Mr. Speaker, that review has not yet concluded on the timescale that I had hoped for initially. Adrian Fulford is conducting the review at the moment and knows that we want to be able to report on it very shortly. I can't tell the House what's in it yet because I've not seen it, but as soon as I've received it, I will return to the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The documents show that in July 2025, Peter Mandelson contacted Number 10 to suggest that the Prime Minister should make time to meet Peter Thiel while he was in London. Peter Mandelson described him as a celebrated techie, and this followed the meeting in February 2025 with Palantir in Washington. So, firstly, can the Minister confirm whether that meeting happened? Secondly, can he confirm that if it's the view of the government, expressed unchallenged by their former ambassador to the US, that a man who described Nazi Carl Schmitt as a major influence on his thinking, and who also said that freedom and democracy are incompatible, is indeed just a celebrated techie? And finally, can he confirm that the government will review all links and contracts between the government, the NHS and police with Palantir following the revelations around Mandelson, Global Council and Palantir?
Secretary Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In relation to the specific question about whether there was a follow-up meeting further to that request, I do not know the answer, so I'm not going to make an assumption one way or another. But if the Honourable Gentleman tables a parliamentary question, I'm sure we'll be able to check and confirm for him. He then asks me about Peter Thiel. I'm not going to take the opportunity to give personal views about Mr. Thiel, but his are on the record. And he thirdly asks me about a review of Palantir contracts, and I think the Health Secretary has confirmed there is a review currently underway in relation to their contract with the Department for Health.
Joe Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank the Chief Secretary for his statement. He's talked before about
the potential implications for vetting, for due diligence, and today about non-corporate communications. But can I ask about one further area of reforms that I know ministers are keen to improve on, which is our lobbying transparency regime, and ask when the House might expect to hear some progress or thoughts to how we could make that more effective and consider the learnings from this episode.
Secretary Jones.
Can I thank my honourable friend for his question and his excellent work in this area, which the government has learnt a great deal from in terms of his expertise. The House knows, Mr Speaker, that this area, alongside the other areas in relation to non-corporate communications channels, peerage removal in the House of Lords, as well as lobbying and transparency and the work of the Ethics and Integrity Commission, is a portfolio of work that the government is in the process of reviewing. Now that we have completed the publication of the second tranche of these documents, I know that we'll want to accelerate our work on those subsequent areas of review, and I look forward to coming back to the House with an update in due course.
Paul Phelps.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The Chief Secretary is well known for being courteous and passionate at the dispatch box, and somebody that I'm a fan of. However, he's not known necessarily... This is where it's bad. He's not known necessarily for answering everybody's questions when they ask them. So in relation to the question laid by the Father of the House, asked by the Father of the House, can I ask him whether he will commit to opening the debate on Wednesday and, with the leave of the House, close it so that every member of this House can ask him the questions?
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman and wouldn't want to displease a fan with inadequate performance from the dispatch box. I can tell the House, Mr Speaker, that we have considered whether I should open and close the debate on Wednesday, which would be unusual. Instead, what we've decided is that my colleague, the Paymaster General, will open the debate. I will be here for the entirety of the debate, and I will certainly do my best to answer all the questions in closing.
Morgan McSweeney's name copied into so many messages. These disclosures show us the need to return to the role of Labour Together. Could the Minister confirm whether any third-party redactions relate to any figures associated with Labour Together? And now that its former director has left his seat in this place, will the Minister tell us when we can expect to see a full and independent investigation into the activities of Labour Together?
I refer the honourable lady to my previous answer at the dispatch box in relation to calls for an investigation into Labour Together, which is a privately owned organisation outside of government and public service. In relation to her invitation to name individuals who have been protected in the disclosure by third-party redactions for whom they do not have a direct relationship to the motion in front of us, I'm not at liberty to do that. But as I said in my statement, we have put those redactions in front of the Chair of the Public Administration Committee for additional checks and balances.
Mr Speaker, given that the key person in this scandal, Lord Mandelson, refused to hand over his personal WhatsApp messages, how can the government guarantee that Parliament and the public have seen the full truth and the Prime Minister was the Prime Minister misled, or is the Prime Minister and the Chief Secretary accepting partial disclosure?
I would gently remind members from the SNP that I think Nicola Sturgeon was very effective at deleting messages during the COVID inquiry. And it's important that ministers do not do that. And I'm sure the SNP have learnt those lessons as much as everybody else. I've made very clear from my statement what the documents that we have available in front of us.
Can I just say I'm not responsible for the answer? It's no use appealing to me. The Minister can answer of his own ability. He doesn't need my help.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, but any encouragement welcome. As I said to the honourable gentleman, the documents in relation to his questions are clearly set out in the bundle and they speak for themselves.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's very clear that Peter Mandelson should never have been appointed as our ambassador. And I know that we will all have Epstein's victims in our minds today. It's right that the Prime Minister has called for the removal of peerages from disgraced peers. And conscious of the comments from the member opposite earlier, can the Chief Secretary confirm that the peerages bill that appeared in the King's speech will actually have teeth and enable us to radically reform the upper chamber?
Can I thank my honourable friend for her question? We are concluding internal drafting on the peerages bill and we'll look to secure time to be able to introduce it in this session. I can assure my honourable friend and the House that we want to bring forward legislation that is effective and meaningful, and that is certainly our intention.
Sir Julian Lewis.
I think the country has a right to know how the Prime Minister reacted at the end of Mandelson's vetting process.
So have the Prime Minister's comments on the outcome of the vetting been released, or are they being withheld, or are we expected to believe that he made no comment about it at all?
Two things, Mr. Speaker. I've made clear in the statement today that vetting documents have been withheld by the Metropolitan Police, although they have gone through, or some of the documents have gone through the Intelligence and Security Committee. But I refer the Right Honourable Gentleman to the Prime Minister's words previously. As has been clear, the Foreign Office did not flag this information with the Prime Minister. He was not aware of it until they had been leaked to the Guardian newspaper.
Jessica Till.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Chief Secretary for his statement today, and I'd like to associate myself with his comments about Epstein's victims. They must absolutely be at the forefront of our mind. But a significant amount of material in this tranche was reviewed by the ISC, and so would he be able to tell the House what steps officials took to ensure that any documents relating to national security and our international relations have been shared with the ISC?
Can I thank my honourable friend? As I confirmed in my statement, over 300 individual documents were put before the Intelligence and Security Committee for their consideration of proposals from the government for redaction. There were a small number of redaction hearings towards the end of that process where agreement was sought between the government and the committee, and all redactions currently published in the documents have been done with the full agreement of the committee.
Chance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like many of us here in this chamber today, I've not yet had the time to read the 1,000+ pages of materials released today. But what this release does do is shine a light of disinfectant on the political culture and how we treat the victims and survivors of heinous abusers of women and girls, and on the scandal of how Mandelson, despite being matey with the convicted child sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, was allowed back into the highest possible office. So does the Minister agree with me that it is essential that this sorry episode in British political history leads to a fundamental change in political culture so that the voices of women and girls who survive abuse at the hands of people like Jeffrey Epstein are always listened to and put front and centre?
Secretary Jones.
I certainly agree with the sentiment of the Honourable Lady's question, Mr. Speaker, and in relation to the time made available to read the documents, I again refer her to the general debate on Wednesday, which she's perfectly able to come to.
Sam Rushworth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Peter Mandelson should never have been appointed. I look forward to the day that we can remove him as a peer. But even now, by not releasing his messages, he makes a mockery of this process. Is there anything that the government can do to compel Peter Mandelson to provide the information that this House seeks?
Senator Johnson.
I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, the government has powers to compel disclosure from government employees and from ministers and special advisers, but does not have powers to compel disclosure from third parties outside of our employment. The Metropolitan Police, however, will of course be conducting its criminal investigation, and I'm sure there'll be disclosure through the court process should a case be put forward by the CPS in due course.
Sir John Whittingdale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Further to the question of my right and friend, the member for New Forest East, we have seen in the first tranche the box note that was sent from the Prime Minister's private office to the Prime Minister, setting out the issues and asking whether or not Peter Mandelson should be appointed. But that piece of paper bears no comment. When I asked the Permanent Secretary of the Cabinet Office about this, she said that she would have expected there to be a record, either of the Prime Minister having written a comment or held a meeting to discuss it. Neither is there apparently any record of. Is the Minister saying that it does not exist? And if it does not, why not?
Sorry, Jones.
Mr. Speaker, the communication of the Prime Minister's decision does exist in the first tranche, where the Prime Minister's principal private secretary has drafted a letter communicating the Prime Minister's decision to the relevant stakeholders.
Thank you very much, Tavares. All of us have a significant amount of reading to fully understand how the good friend of a convicted sex offender was rewarded with a top job. But it remains obvious that Epstein's victims simply weren't on the radar of the boys' club in control at number 10. Now, the Minister can come to his place again and again and again, but how does he justify that culture that was in power at the time?
I would just gently point out, Mr. Speaker, that number 10 isn't solely occupied by men. There are very senior women who work in the Labour Party and the Labour government as well. But in relation to the sentiment of her question, which I agree with, it is important that we have a diversity of view, of diversity of input into decision-making process wherever decision makers are, whether in government or business or elsewhere.
Mr. Speaker, can the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster confirm that the Prime Minister has not deleted any of the messages he received electronically on any personal or government devices in relation to Peter Mandelson?
All of the Prime Minister's messages have been disclosed in the bundle in the same way as every other minister.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could I take the Minister back to the answer given to the member for York earlier on? Palantir are a very big and very dangerous, in my view, outfit altogether. The government is developing a close relationship with Palantir, platforming, etc. Could he assure the House that everything to do with Palantir will now be paused until we can get to the heart of the whole matter and how they first became embroiled in government contracts, how they gained them, and what their influence is over this government, particularly via Peter Mandelson?
Mr. Speaker, I'd slightly challenge the assumption that the government is developing a so-called close relationship with Palantir. As far as I'm aware, that's not true. Palantir has been awarded, I think, 2 or so contracts for government services and continues to bid for services, and it's for departments in line with our procurement policy to decide who they give contracts to. But the Right Honourable Gentleman is right. There are a whole range of issues in line with procurement policy that ministers and officials will need to consider, including the protection of people's personal data, the conduct of companies, and their ability to deliver public services in line with our values.
Lincoln Joss.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his statement. The media are going to have a frenzy over the tittle-tattle of all this stuff over the next 3 days. But to my mind, the whole Mandelson affair represents a very serious breach of national security. And so can the Minister reassure me and the House that the Foreign Office and the security services are turning over with a fine-tooth comb every minute of Lord Mandelson's time as ambassador to make sure that his actions in that office were in the national interest?
Secretary Jones.
Mr. Speaker, I can confirm, as I think I have from the dispatch box before, that officials are conducting that review of documentation, but also making sure that through the review being conducted by Sir Adrian Fulford, we avoid these situations happening in the future, in particular with departments to have the right to not take the recommendation of UK security vetting when appointing people to develop vetting status.
Josh Bobrin.
Mr. Speaker, in the 1,500 pages published today, I was staggered to find that the victims and survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's crimes are not referred to in any of the documents dated before Peter Mandelson's appointment. The only reference to Epstein's victims here is an email sent after Mandelson was sacked. Victims and survivors should never be an afterthought, and they clearly were in this case. So how will the government ensure that the trauma of Epstein's victims and survivors is never betrayed again?
Secretary Jones.
I'd firstly just say to the honourable member that the disclosure of information from Bloomberg and then subsequently from the United States Department of Justice showed a depth and extent of relationship between Peter Mandelson and Jeffrey Epstein that nobody was aware of. Nobody was aware of that until that information became public. That, though, doesn't excuse the point he makes in his question, and he's right, as I have said at the start of every statement from this dispatch box in relation to this issue, that whilst we debate all of these procedural issues about WhatsApp or security vetting or who was given a job on what basis, at the heart of this is the most atrocious crimes unimaginable to all of us from Jeffrey Epstein in relation to many, many young women and girls. And we know that this is not just contained to Jeffrey Epstein, but violence against women and girls is sadly a more widespread issue that the government is working hard at trying to tackle in line with our commitment to halve it over the course of this Parliament.
Windmore.
Speaker, the central figure in this entire saga is someone who enjoyed a cosy relationship with ministers at the heart of this government, and yet he's refused to hand over his mobile phone. And the government, many of whom he had as close friends, seem to have simply accepted that refusal. So does the Minister really expect that this House can believe that full transparency has been achieved when Mandelson continues to be able to pick and choose what evidence he allows us to see?
Minister.
I share the Right Honourable Lady's sentiment. The government doesn't have the legal power to require the disclosure of Peter Mandelson's device. As I said in earlier statements, there are other powers available, for example, to the Metropolitan Police and others, should a criminal investigation proceed to a CPS case being put before the courts, and so it may become more clear in the future. But the government has done everything it can to ensure that we've provided full disclosure in compliance with the humble address.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Volume 2, Part 3, page 243. His predecessor states when talking about Labour MPs, every meeting I have is, who can we tax in order to pay benefits to others? Is that the same experience he's having in every meeting he now has?
Minister?
No.
Jim Shannon, final question.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, thank you. Can I, Chief Secretary is obviously, and he is very well liked and by myself in this House, and we appreciate his honesty in his answers, if maybe not all the information we're seeking. I very gently would remind the Chief Secretary that for the general public, these continued delays are being viewed as obstructive, and the goal for this government must be to show that no one is beyond scrutiny and accountability, and that any further delay or redaction will not help to reach that goal. So will the Chief Secretary undertake to ensure that these delays end, the materials released, and the general public are assured that we are all accountable for mistakes and lessons have to be and must be learned? Thank you.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. He knows, because I've said repeatedly at the dispatch box, that I take the role of Parliament very seriously in relation to holding the government to account, and as a former Select Committee Chair, in particular the role of Select Committees, as well as the statements and questions we can undertake on the floor of the House. That's why I have gone to lengths to ensure that the Intelligence and Security Committee, the Public Administration Committee and the Foreign Affairs Committee, as the lead committees in relation to this issue, have been given as full and as transparent access to the process and the documents as I've been able to make available, and why I've secured additional time for members to be able to ask further questions on Wednesday.
Final question, Charlie Jewett.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In Volume 2, Part 1 of the documents released today, pages 115 to 116, there is an email from Ollie Robbins dated the 16th of September 2025, in which he writes to another senior civil servant in Downing Street saying that he has still not yet seen potentially crucial documents in relation to the appointment of Peter Mandelson. Now, that date is important. It is the same day that Chris Wormholt, the former Cabinet Secretary, wrote to the Prime Minister saying that all appropriate processes had been followed in appointing Peter Mandelson. Can those two things be true? Can appropriate processes have been followed if Mr. Robbins himself hadn't seen these potentially crucial documents?
Secretary Jones.
It's an important question, Mr. Speaker, but a question that I'm unable to answer, given I was not privy to those discussions at the time. And maybe if other select committees are able to ask questions in the future, they might put that to the relevant people.
That completes the statement. We'll let from bench change over.
Which brings us to a statement on the Equality Act 2010 Code of Practice. Minister Seema Malhotra.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With permission, I would like to make a statement on the draft Equality Act 2010 Code of Practice for services, public functions and associations. The Equality and Human Rights Commission, the EHRC, is the independent equality regulator and ensures compliance with the Equality Act 2010. Their code of practice covers all 9 protected characteristics and the steps service providers should take to comply with the law. On receipt of the draft code from the EHRC in September, we consulted with the devolved governments in Wales and Scotland as per the process set out in the Equality Act 2006. The EHRC sent the government an updated draft code last month, following engagement and further legal analysis, ensuring it is robust and accessible with clear explanations. The Minister for Women and Equalities updated Parliament in April, with the government committed to laying the code in May, following restrictions during the pre-election period. My right honourable friend honoured that commitment on the 21st of May. The EHRC have worked hard to produce a code that works for everyone. Following the laying of the draft code, there is now a 40-day period, not including the recess, that allows for parliamentary scrutiny as set out in the Equality Act 2006. If neither House disapproves the draft in this period, the Minister can then revoke the 2011 code by regulations and then bring the new code into force by a commencement order. Today, I want to update the House on the contents of the code, in particular with what has changed between this draft code and the 2011 version. The updates are primarily where there have been legislative changes, developments in case law, a change or clarification of terminology, or new guidance issued since the original code was published in 2011. The most substantial changes relate to the ruling by the Supreme Court in the case of For Women Scotland Limited versus the Scottish Ministers, handed down on the 16th of April 2025. This judgment, Madam Deputy Speaker, set out that sex means biological sex for the purposes of the Equality Act 2010, and that trans people are still protected by the Act. In their judgment, the Supreme Court also warned against reading this judgment as a triumph of one or more groups in our society at the expense of another. That is why this government will always treat these issues sensitively and will refuse to use any group as a political football. The government has been clear that we will protect single-sex spaces based on biological sex where they are needed, such as women's refuges. We have also been clear that everyone, including trans people, should have the right to access the services they need in a way that is respectful, protects dignity and privacy, and ensures adequate provision. Changes primarily relate to the provision of sex-based services, when it is lawful to limit access to services and associations based on sex and gender reassignment, implications for competitive sport, and asking about someone's sex. For duty bearers, the draft code provides further clarity on how service providers can follow the Supreme Court ruling in practice. Whilst it can't cover every single scenario, the EHRC have provided key explanations and worked examples, meaning that there is something every organisation can take from this and apply in their own context with common sense. If a service provider still isn't sure, perhaps because of a quite specific circumstance, they should take legal advice. For clarity, the code indicates that a single-sex service should be provided on the basis of biological sex, so a woman-only service should be for biological women only. Service providers should find the code provides certainty and clarity in terms of who can access single-sex services and how they can best ensure women's privacy, dignity, and safety. The code also encourages services to clearly communicate their policy on single-sex provision, empowering women to make informed choices when accessing services. This could be especially useful for those women who, for feelings of safety or cultural or religious reasons, are unable to share some spaces with men. The draft code is also clear that trans people should not be left without services to use. Providers could provide mixed-sex facilities or specific support for trans people. We believe service providers will be able to find the right balance for everyone. Members have also raised accessing toilet facilities. Madam Deputy Speaker, the code indicates that toilets designated as male or female should be for those of that biological sex. Trans people can use accessible toilets, individual lockable toilets, or unisex toilets. The draft code reflects that there must be toilet services for all, and many businesses and service providers will already meet those requirements. For example, a small cafe might only have 1 or 2 individual locked toilets for use by all customers. The draft code provides practical guidance on different ways to comply with the law. Some organisations won't need to make any changes at all. And for those that do, in the majority of cases, we are talking about changing signs on existing facilities or updating them so that they are fully enclosed. What this code does not provide is the right for members of the public to challenge one another on their sex and access to those spaces. People have been using single-sex spaces with a sensible and respectful attitude to others for years and will continue to do so. Most people have the common sense to step in when necessary. For example, when a person of the opposite biological sex enters a single-sex facility in error, and when to alert a member of staff. The draft code provides clarity to service providers to ensure people have access to services that are private and safe. I am aware that there have also been concerns raised by some over the code's content regarding special category personal data. The code states that where an individual is asked to confirm their sex, this should be done sensitively and with respect for their privacy. The draft code explains that information about sex is likely to constitute special category personal data, where, for example, asking about sex may lead to the disclosure of someone's medical history or that they have a GRC. The code advises providers to handle such conversations appropriately. We will work with the EHRC to ensure service providers understand what is required of them when handling data. Madam Deputy Speaker, there is also an interest in associations. If an association is for women only, the draft code indicates that should be on the basis of biological sex. If an association wanted to be trans-inclusive, the draft code section on associations based on more than one protected characteristic means they can do so by choosing their membership to be both sex and gender reassignment. There are also changes regarding disability, maternity and pregnancy protections. For disabled people, the draft code highlights protections for them in the Equality Act that expand on what was included in the previous code, to access to services. This will be the first time they are recognised and explained in the code, and this is an important step for disabled people's rights. For pregnant and breastfeeding women, the updated code highlights that harassment relating to breastfeeding may also constitute unlawful harassment on the grounds of sex, confirming that women are protected. The code also highlights that while the protected characteristic of pregnancy and maternity is not covered directly under the harassment protections in the Act, it is indirectly covered as it amounts to harassment related to sex. We note the wider interest in the implementation of the For Women Scotland judgment and the draft code across government. We are committed to this and to working with departments, considering the implications of the code to policies and activities. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Equality Act is one of the most significant achievements in modern British history, enacted by the last Labour government. It is the quiet guardian in millions of people's daily lives. This government will uphold it and protect it, not weaken it. We are grateful to the EHRC for their work on the draft code to ensure that duty bearers and service users have up-to-date guidance on the Equality Act. We will always uphold our British values of treating everyone with dignity and respect, and I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Minister Mims-Davis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for advance sight of the statement. The Secretary of State first received, it's understood, the draft EHRC Code of Practice in September last year, 9 months ago. 9 months in which the law has been clear. The Supreme Court had ruled women, girls, public bodies, businesses across the country have been waiting for the government to act. What did they do when they received it instead? Delay after delay after delay. A government reluctant to face its backbenchers and protect vulnerable women and girls. First, the Secretary of State claimed she needed impact assessments. Then she said consultation with devolved governments was required, despite this being a reserved matter. After that, it was purdah, and now, having exhausted every excuse, she chose to lay the Code of Practice on the very last day before the Whitsun parliamentary recess, seemingly to actively minimise scrutiny. That is not acceptable. It is also greatly telling that the Secretary of State has sadly not even come to the House herself to account for these decisions, seeming the law of Makerfield is too great. She previously told the House that she requested only minor changes to the EHRC's draft. If that is the case, then I ask this Minister, in the Secretary of State's absence, why did it take 8 months to request them? I note from the statement it talks about engagement, and in the interest of transparency, who was that with? That's why my right honourable friend, the member for East Surrey, and I have written to the chair of the EHRC, asking for clarity on what changes were made. Under the Equality Act 2006, the Secretary of State must provide written reasons for rejecting the original draft. As changes have plainly been made, will the Minister importantly commit to publishing what has changed and to why? Madam Deputy Speaker, the Code of Practice is right to emphasise the importance of protecting single-sex spaces and services for women. However, let us be clear, the law has been settled since the Supreme Court judgment over a year ago. Sex means biological sex, yet the ruling the Secretary of State has failed to enforce. Women have faced ongoing harassment and discrimination for stating this basic fact. We have seen cases such as the Darlington nurses hounded out of their roles or drawn into lengthy tribunal processes for asserting their legal rights not to share changing rooms with men. The government has done nothing to protect them. So what does the Secretary of State and this Minister say to those many women whose privacy, safety and dignity have been compromised during these 9 months of inaction? And why did she fail to get a grip on her own government when department after department claimed they could not update their policies while awaiting this code? And I asked regarding the statement we heard from the Minister, and I quote, "We are committed to doing this and are working across departments, considering the implications of the code to policies and activities." Is that why, after more than a year after the Supreme Court ruling, that the NHS has still not updated its policies on single-sex spaces for staff? Perhaps following the new Health Secretary's recent remarks, there may now be greater clarity within the Labour wider government about what a woman is. This revisionist mindset about a supposed Labour long-term support for single-sex spaces will frankly be fresh news to the honourable member for Canterbury. And so will the Minister set out the steps that all departments will now be roundly taking to comply with this code, and will they all do so without further delay? Madam Deputy Speaker, in the meantime, some have sought to actively misrepresent this issue as an attack on trans people. It is not. It is simply about applying the law correctly while safeguarding women and girls. And at the start of Pride Month, I do think the Green Party's deputy leader's inflammatory rhetoric on this is frankly reprehensible and frankly unhelpful. And not to be outdone, we are witnessing peak Lib Demery, the party leader claiming to accept the Supreme Court's judgment while opposing the guidance that flows from it. As it has been rightly pointed out, that position is frankly unprincipled. You cannot claim to support the rule of law while rejecting its practical application, unless you are a Liberal Democrat. Mr. Speaker, this code of practice is welcome, as it covers, and as the Minister rightly said, a broad range of areas, including age, disability, pregnancy and maternity, race and so much more. But it's been disgracefully 9 months overdue that it has landed, helpfully, after local elections where we women have been voting. And during that time, women have paid the price of inaction. And now it's finally been published. Women and girls need proper action. Madam Deputy Speaker, not hiding away, not further delay, not more excuses. Immediate enforcement of rights that women and girls are entitled to under the law of this land. Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I also thank the Honourable Lady for her response and for her questions. Let me say up front that on this side of the House we take this issue incredibly seriously, and services and associations need to operate and to comply with the law, and we want to support them. The issue is not a political football for us, and nor should it be for any member of this House. We are focused on the practical, treating everyone with compassion, dignity and respect. And we should never fan the flames or seek to grab headlines. And we will support services to operate and provide single-sex spaces where needed and ensure trans people have access to all the services to support their needs too. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Lady accuses the government of a delay, but she will know, as a Shadow Equalities Minister, that there is process that has to be followed. And she will know that in line with that process outlined in the Equality Act 2006, we consulted the devolved administrations, we worked across government on the myriad of services that we provide or support others to provide. We conducted analysis of the code and its impact. The EHRC made some changes themselves following their engagement and consultation. We were told by the Cabinet Office Permanent Secretary that we couldn't lay the code during the pre-election period, and we have now laid the draft. She has said that laying the draft, as my right honourable friend did in her commitment to lay the draft in May, laying it before recess was somehow seeking to delay scrutiny. Madam Deputy Speaker, it may help to clarify that in laying the draft, there is a 40-day period that allows for parliamentary scrutiny, and those dates exclude the parliamentary recess. There is sufficient time for adequate scrutiny, and I am sure the House will give that matter their attention. I do just want to also make a remark in relation to guidance for the NHS, because it is helpful, I think, to the House to know that NHS England is currently reviewing its guidance and will ensure it reflects the Supreme Court ruling in the For Women Scotland versus Scottish Ministers case, and will take account of the Equality and Human Rights Commission's statutory code of practice. It is also important to note that while the code does not directly apply to employers, an explanation of the Equality Act 2010, its explanation of the Equality Act 2010, particularly around unlawful discrimination and harassment, will be relevant to and helpful for employers in considering how to best comply with their obligations under that legislation. The EHRC has a separate employment code of practice, which it also intends to update in the future.
Chair of the Women and Equalities Select Committee, Sarah Owen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I really wish there was a better beginning to Pride Month than what we are discussing today. Although the code is marginally different from its draft, it is still a trans-exclusionary one at its core and unfortunately not inclusive. Moves like this from the EHRC and the government have seen the UK slip from 3rd in 2019 to 22nd in the European rankings for LGBT plus people to live and to feel safe. Does the Minister share my concern that this new code of practice will only further the UK's now hostile environment for trans people and not calm it? And how will she act to stop the erosion of LGBT plus rights in this country?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for her question, and indeed she will know that making sure that we can support women and their rights alongside treating trans people with dignity must be the priority for all of us. That is what we are aiming to achieve, and that is why it is important that we have the draft code now available for scrutiny, and that we will continue to ensure that we provide single-sex spaces where needed, and also ensure that trans people have access to services to support their needs, and do so in an environment of dignity and respect for all.
Democrat spokesperson Marie Goldman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for advance sight of her statement. After the Supreme Court's ruling last year, the government's job was to give people, businesses and organisations clear, workable guidance. This code is instead unworkable, exclusionary and expensive to businesses. As the Minister knows, the government must ensure they meet the legal obligations placed on them by the public sector equality duty. This requires the Minister to have due regard to the need to eliminate unlawful discrimination, harassment, victimisation and any other conduct, to advance equality of opportunity between people who share a protected characteristic and people who do not, and to foster good relations between people who share a protected characteristic and people who do not share it. Yet it's the government's own equality impact assessment that identifies disproportionate harm to those with protected characteristics and a failure to set out how that harm will be addressed. Can the Minister really say, hand on heart, that she believes that the guidance does that? The impact assessment notes how the guidance will likely impact women who aren't trans, yet don't meet cultural and social expectations around what a woman should look like. There have already been stories of women with mastectomies being challenged when accessing women-only spaces because they don't look like women. Has the Minister truly considered this? For trans, non-binary and intersex people, this code operates from a position of exclusion. It risks driving those small minorities away from public life, as leading mental health charities have since warned. This guidance conflicts with our core British values of tolerance, decency, respect for individual liberty and the rule of law. That's why I urge the Minister to withdraw it and accept that this needs resolving by Parliament as lawmakers. To achieve this, I beg the Minister to adopt the Liberal Democrat proposal to appoint a joint committee of cross-party MPs and peers to conduct post-legislative scrutiny of both the Gender Recognition Act and the Equality Act 2010, taking evidence from all communities who have been impacted, in order to propose amendments on new legislation it sees as necessary to ensure that existing rights are protected. If we work together, we can fix this. Sowing division will not.
Stop.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her comments and her question. I will also say that I do want to highlight again how the draft code does provide further clarity on how service providers can follow the Supreme Court ruling in practice, and that we can do both in making sure that we protect single-sex spaces as well as ensure that we have services and support for trans people. And it is important to recognise that whilst it can't cover every single scenario, the EHRC have provided key explanations and worked examples that are also based on wide consultation that there is something that every organisation can take from and apply in their own context with common sense. It is also important to say that if a service provider isn't sure, then they can and should take legal advice. I want to also make a mention of a burden on business, because the EHRC expects that for most aspects of the draft code, businesses will already be compliant, and for some businesses there will be no cost at all. For example, a small cafe might just have one individual lockable toilet for use by all customers, and they would not need to change anything. But it may be helpful as well to the Honourable Lady and to the House to know that the EHRC will also be running a session to answer questions from members of Parliament later this week, and there may be some matters she wishes to raise directly.
Nadia Whittam.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The EHRC's Code of Practice fails everyone. It effectively pushes trans people out of public life. It subjects all women to gender policing based on stereotypes. And it does not provide clarity to organisations who want to be trans inclusive. Like, for example, a charity that wants to put on a women's coffee morning that is open to the public can't, according to this guidance, be trans inclusive without being open to the whole public. The government's own equalities impact assessments warns of the disproportionate risk of violence and sexual assault towards trans women if forced to use men's services, as well as the increased harassment of anyone who does not conform to gender stereotypes. So why is the government pushing ahead with this? Why not instead withdraw the guidance and legislate to clarify that the Equality Act was always intended to be trans-inclusive? For goodness sake, it was passed after the last Labour government passed the Gender Recognition Act in 2004.
I thank my honourable friend for her question, and the government is proud of the Equality Act, and we will always protect and uphold it. I do just want to pick up on her question about associations, because it is clear in the draft code that if an association is and describes itself as for women only, then the draft code does indicate that should be on the basis of biological sex. But if an association wants to be trans inclusive, it isn't saying that it needs to be open to absolutely everybody to have services. The draft code section on associations based on more than one protected characteristic means that they can do so by choosing their membership to be both sex and gender reassignment. And it is important that we continue to make sure that that is as clear as possible.
Rebecca Paul.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, I can say it's definitely better late than never. And after listening to the Lib Dem spokesperson, I can't believe I'm going to say this, I'm actually grateful we've got a Labour government and not a Lib Dem government, because what the Lib Dems have just said is absolutely shocking. You don't respect the rule of law at all. But on that note, I'm going to ask a very technical question. Did the Secretary of State formally reject the draft Code of Practice as submitted by the EHRC in September 2025? And if so, please can she provide us with a copy of the written reasons given as per Section 14 of the Equality Act 2006?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I have shared the process that we have been through, which is in line with the process outlined in the Equality Act 2006. And it is important to note that in line with that process, that we have seen the consultation with the devolved administrations, and that there has been work also done by the EHRC, and that in line with that process, the Secretary of State has now laid the draft code before the House, as she committed to do.
Dame Meg Healey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wonder if the Minister could clarify very specifically, if a single-sex organisation wanted to also open its doors to people, to trans people, Could that be all trans people? Or, for example, would a women's organisation be able to open their doors or membership to trans women exclusively?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for her question. I know that she won't expect me to comment on individual cases. I think what is important to note is that there is guidance with worked examples in the draft code, and it will be important if an organisation is unsure to be able to consult that guidance and to be able to take legal advice should they wish it. But I do think that there is also in this the experience and the common sense and also the application of the draft code with its examples that I think will provide answers to all organisations as to how they should proceed with the services that they provide.
Tom Gordon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm really appalled, quite frankly, with the response from the official opposition. If you look just a few Prime Ministers ago, when it was Theresa May, she said, indeed, when it comes to rights and protections for trans people, there is a long way to go. Well, how far the Tory party have fallen from those words. As a member of a Joint Committee on Human Rights, I sat on the evidence session when we interviewed the new chair of the EHRC, and the Minister to say that it was an independent process when the government rammed it through, despite a cross-party consensus that the new chair was not fit for the role, is quite frankly surprising. I wanted to pick up as well on the fact that the Minister said that we should treat these issues sensitively. Today is the start of Pride Month. This is not just a kick in the teeth, but a slap in the face of LGBT people across this country. To do this today of all days. And I wanted to know what the Minister would say to constituents like mine who I've met with and had to hear about how they've been challenged in toilets because they live their lives as trans people already before this guidance was put forward. Why does she think this will make it any better? What basis does she have that that suggestion?
Minister.
I thank the honourable member for his question, and he will also be aware that for a long time, and will continue to be so, people have also operated in society with respect for each other and in relation to single-sex spaces as well. And it is important to note that access to a toilet should be very clear. It is important to recognise the ruling from the Supreme Court in relation to toilets, that toilets that are designated as male or female should be for those of that biological sex, but that there are other ways in which facilities can be provided, and indeed for a large number of organisations that I think we see across the country, that is already the case, whether it is unisex toilets or individual lockable toilets. That means that those facilities are accessible by anybody.
Rachel Maskell.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I've listened very carefully to my constituents who identify as trans, and one of the things that is very clear from the EHRC guidance is that it's going to cost organisations a significant amount to put on additional services and indeed facilities if they are going to become inclusive organisations. So could the Minister say what discussions have had taken place with the Treasury to ensure that organisations are supported to build an inclusive society?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for this question, and I will just reiterate what the EHRC has also said, which is that it expects that for most aspects of the draft code, businesses will already be compliant. And indeed, if she is also referring to government services, we are committed to making sure that the government estate is 100% compliant with the requirements of the Equality Act and in line with the EHRC guidance.
Dr. Luke Evans.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'm going to try again for some clarity, if it's okay, Minister, because we've heard from the front bench asking about when written explanations will come from the draft changes, and then from my honourable friend from Reigate about when they will come. In both answers, the Minister talked about process, while process dictates that there should be written answers. So when will we see them in this House?
I thank the honourable gentleman. I am also aware that the Shadow Secretary of State has written to the EHRC, and I'm sure that in relation to those specific questions, the EHRC will also be engaging directly.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. What this place does best is scrutiny. That is why it is so problematic that this legislation is coming forward in a draft form through a negative SI, because when we look at this guidance, it falls apart on hard contact with the real world. I want to quote back to the Minister something she's just said in her statement, because I know businesses in my local community who just want to be able to be a cafe or a restaurant will be troubled by it. She says that the guidance does not provide the right of members of the public to challenge one another on their sex and access to those spaces, but she also says where an individual is asked to confirm their sex, this should be done sensitively. Now, for most businesses, that will be deeply confusing as to whether or not somebody can or cannot be challenged. And frankly, what they don't want is fights between their customers. So to prevent that, people being judged by their appearance on their gender, which we know will harm many more people than I suspect even those people who wish to see harm through this guidance would like, does she accept that for most businesses, getting rid of women's toilets altogether will probably be the safest option to do, and won't that be an inevitable consequence of what this guidance does?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for her question, and it will be for organisations to make decisions about how they comply with the law, and that different organisations will choose a different way of doing so. In the majority of cases, we are talking about changing signs on existing facilities or updating them so they may be fully enclosed. And indeed, when it comes to challenging each other, as I mentioned before, the Code doesn't provide the right for members of the public to challenge one another on their sex or access to those spaces. But most people will have the common sense to step in where necessary, or indeed, if they are concerned, to alert a member of staff.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd also like to refer the Minister to her own words, which she described the Equality Act as one of the most significant achievements in modern British history. I think we would all agree with that. But when she goes on to describe it as the quiet guardian in millions of people's daily lives, and that this government will uphold and protect it, not weaken it, you'll look very hard before you'll find a member of the LGBTQ community in this country who will believe that. I fully respect, regardless of what the Honourable Member for Reigate might think, the Supreme Court's judgment, but I believe the Supreme Court judged on the letter of the law, not on the spirit of that historic achievement that she described. So in order to reflect the spirit of that, do we not now need to look carefully at the Equality Act and the Gender Recognition Act and ensure that people in this country, all people in this country, women, the LGBT community, because their rights are not mutually exclusive, they get the protection that was envisaged in that law, both in the letter of the law and in the spirit of the law.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. I do want, however, to challenge her on some of what she said. It is important to recognise and to reassure trans people that there are still protections in the Equality Act via the gender reassignment protected characteristic, and this includes direct and indirect discrimination. It is also important to note and to not take for granted the choices that we make in government. They are active choices to pursue and support people's rights. But the government has also recently updated hate crime legislation to make hate crimes against LGBT people an aggravated offence, that we will also be shortly bringing forward trans-inclusive conversion practice legislation to end this abusive practice. And so it is important to not say that we are not supportive of trans rights and LGBT plus rights, it is important to recognise the progress we are making where we can, the complexity of the debate that we're having today, and the importance of making sure that in complying with the law, we are both supporting women and single-sex spaces alongside treating trans people with respect and dignity.
Dr. Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I do thank the Minister for her statement and her attempts to present it in quite an even and fair way, because I think this is already a debate which is far too toxic, so I thank her for that. She will acknowledge, however, that the guidance will change the lives of many people, particularly people who have been living as trans for many years. But she's right that we should protect the rights of women and trans people. But I'm keen to understand what that means for those delivering single-sex services where they only have very limited space. They have no space to create that third space. So what do? And if they're a charity, where do they find funding to make that happen? Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
I thank my honourable friend for his question, and I think he will also find that similar scenarios are also shared in some of the guidance and the worked examples. And it is the case that for the vast majority of organisations that the changes may actually be very, very small. It is important to recognise that as organisations seek to comply with the guidance and the law, that if there are changes to be made, that, as I say, in the vast majority of cases, they will be very small, and that they can also take advice should they be unsure.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, it's been a year since the verdict, over a year since the verdicts. Can I ask the Minister what she's doing to persuade non-compliant public sector bodies like the NHS to implement the Supreme Court ruling at the earliest possible opportunity?
Minister.
I thank the honourable member. He may not have heard me referencing the work that the NHS is doing, and it is important that they are able to continue that work, and also that we ensure that other government departments who are still working through the implications for them are able to do so and bring forward their policies.
Rupa Huck.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've had dozens of emails, and I can't be the only one, from constituents dismayed at the fact that this guidance, under this, the vague, ill-defined and highly subjective term discomfort of service users becomes the litmus test for excluding people from essential services. I heard what my honourable friend said about associations, but can we be clear that public spaces will still be able to provide trans-inclusive services? Otherwise, I feel that this guidance is simply unreasonable, unfair and unworkable.
Yes, sir.
I thank my honourable friend, and she is right, and it is extremely important that as we take forward the draft code and its implications and look to how we ensure compliance with the law, that we do support women and their rights to single-sex services and spaces, but that we are also doing so, making sure that we are meeting the needs of trans people too, and that is incumbent on all of us in this House.
Wishart.
Deputy Speaker, at the beginning of Pride Month, there's going to be a number of trans people who will be unsettled and anxious about the contents of the statement today, and they'll be wondering how on earth they will safely access public services. But not only have we fallen to number 22 in the Rainbow Index, we're now 45th out of 49 European nations for the service of transgender people across Europe. Can she give any explanation about why we have fallen so lowly? And what does she expect the impact of this code of practice today to have on these league table positions?
I always thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and it is important to note that in seeking to bring forward this draft code, it does have more worked examples. It has seen consultation. He is able to consult directly with or speak directly with the EHRC about the way in which they have consulted and brought forward the draft code. And it is incredibly important as well, as I have said, that we have that balance, that we are protecting single-sex spaces for women, and that should not be in conflict with ensuring that trans people continue to be protected from harassment and discrimination. And I want to reiterate again that the Supreme Court's judgment warned against reading this as a triumph of one or more groups in our society at the expense of one another. It is important to get this right for everyone.
Cat Eccles. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This proposed code of practice represents a major worrying change in how equality law may operate in practice for trans people and service providers. A number of LGBTQ+ charities and equality organisations have warned the guidance risks legitimising exclusion and increasing harassment of both trans people and gender non-conforming cis people. And I've had a number of my constituents across Stourbridge contact me who are deeply concerned by the proposed changes. Can the Minister confirm whether this House will have the opportunity to debate and vote on the final code of practice before anything comes into force?
I thank my honourable friend for her question. And indeed, on debate, we are certainly having some of that debate today, and it will be also possible to see questions coming forward in the usual and the matters raised in the usual way. But I will also say to her that when the EHRC does have its meeting for members of Parliament, that there may well be issues that she wishes to discuss directly and to, I'm sure, continue in the usual way to find ways to raise these matters in the House.
Leila Moran.
Deputy Speaker, Oxford is proud to have the highest proportion of trans and non-binary people of any area outside of London. So it's with sadness that I received an email from a constituent, Jenny, who already accompanies their spouse, who is trans, to the toilet because she's so worried for their safety. Indeed, last year, 3,800 hate crimes were reported against trans people, and the worry in the community is that that will only get worse, not better, as a result of this guidance. Now, this weekend is Oxford Pride, and I and the Liberal Democrats will stand proudly with our trans and non-binary neighbours. My question to the Minister is simple. What if she's wrong? What if her assurance that this will protect trans and non-binary rights doesn't come to pass, and in fact it does get worse? Is she not open to working with others across this House to fix this, or is this a done deal?
I thank the honourable lady. She will know she has great experience in this House as well about the processes of engagement and the consultation and the engagement that the EHRC has been doing in the development of this guidance as well, and the fact that there were 2 periods of consultation last year. And it is important, she may well wish to raise some matters as well with the EHRC directly, but to recognise that we also must respond to the ruling from the Supreme Court. And it is important to recognise that in upholding the law as it is in the Equality Act, that we do have a responsibility to both protect single-sex spaces as well as make sure that we are ensuring that the rights of trans people are also respected and their services and needs supported. And I am sure that she will continue to raise those concerns.
Alex Tobel.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As a member of the Joint Committee on Human Rights, I do have concerns that human rights that have long applied to trans people since the Gender Recognition Act 2004 will no longer apply, and in a much broader way, I'm afraid, in the Minister's areas that she brought forward in her statement to the House. For instance, read together paragraphs 2.5 and 2.92 of the Code imply that those in a relationship between a transgender person and a cisgender person can no longer enjoy the rights they have enjoyed since the Gender Recognition Act, for instance, in terms of their relationship that is respected and registered and recognised by that law. Has there been a human rights analysis of the EHRC guidance, because the right to family life does appear to be under threat from it?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. And I do suggest that he certainly does raise that with the EHRC. I'm not sure I completely agree with his conclusions on that, but I am very happy to meet him and discuss further.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
As we begin Pride Month, I will reiterate my party's solidarity with trans people who are valued members of our communities in Wales and deserve continued protection from harassment and discrimination. We will uphold the rule of law through Welsh Government, and in this guidance, however, it appears that there is a lack of clear, workable guidance for services supporting transgender people. We've heard this on numerous occasions today, and this is causing huge concerns. She has mentioned consultation with devolved governments, but what assurance can she give me that the UK Government will work with Welsh Government to support inclusive services?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question, and I think she will also agree with me if I say that transgender people are valued members of all of our communities across the whole of our country. And I am happy to assure her that we will continue to be engaging with our devolved administrations, with Wales, with Scotland. Engagement is an important part of how we move forward on all issues.
Janet Davey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm being contacted by so many transgender constituents and who are saying to me that the EHRC guidance is in conflict with the Equality Act. They feel the guidance is making it absolutely worse for transgender people who are feeling further stigmatised and isolated. What would the Minister say to my constituents regarding how they are feeling?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend, and I think that we all want to ensure that trans people across the country are feeling that they are supported. And it is important as we move forward on how the code, the draft code, is providing guidance with the worked examples and with the extensive consultation that has gone on, that I hope that we will see that in striking the balance that we very much need, that in supporting women and their rights alongside treating trans people with dignity, that we will see that progress. And it is important that we continue to do that, deal with this topic sensitively and with respect, and continue to make sure that we engage as we move forward.
Josh Babarindi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to pay tribute to Born Out LGBT and Born This Way in Eastbourne, who do great work to advance the rights of LGBT folks locally, and indeed LGBT plus Lib Dems and Lib Dem women, who do great work within my party to advance equality as well. Unlike this code of practice, which is unworkable for all, immoral for all, and undermines equality for all. The government's own equality impact assessment has said of the draft code, women who are considered masculine may face greater scrutiny about their sex as a result of the changes. This will likely have a negative impact on their group. In what way does this enhance the privacy, dignity and safety of women?
I thank the honourable member. I will perhaps just say to him that the draft code is there to provide further clarity on how service providers can follow the Supreme Court ruling in practice. It cannot cover every scenario, but with the worked examples, there is something that every organisation can take and apply in their own context and with common sense. It is also important that if a service provider is still unsure, that they can take legal advice. But in addition, there will be an expectation that organisations are able to undertake training for their staff, so that if there is any concern, then there is a process to deal with any issue sensitively.
Steve Brace.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I do have concerns about the code and its implementation, though these largely stem from the Supreme Court judgment and its seeming disregard for the Gender Recognition Act. While we are operating within the law as set by the Supreme Court, we should also recognise the anxiety and the trauma that the judgment has caused many people in our communities, including mine in Exeter. Does the Minister agree that the onus does lie with duty bearers to be inclusive and transparent when it comes to services and organisations, given gender reassignment is a protected characteristic? And also, secondly, can the Minister provide a bit more clarity on the answer to the question asked by the member for Walthamstow? Does someone have the right, or does someone not have the right, to challenge someone in a service or an area such as a single-sex toilet? And if they do have the right, how might someone prove their biological sex, especially if they have a gender recognition certificate?
Minister.
Let me thank my honourable friend for that. I think that it is important to clarify that as we move forward, that we continue to have engagement, and he may want to raise some of those matters as well with the EHRC. But in relation to challenging, what we have said is that in the way that we've had prior to this debate, people being able to sensitively say if you can have somebody walking into the wrong toilet and to raise that. If there is a concern that is beyond that, then they should alert a member of staff. And we do expect that there will be training in organisations, and that organisations will see themselves having that responsibility to ensure that they do have an inclusive service that they are providing to all. And it will be important that as we continue to move forward in this debate, that we're able to see that training so that it can be the case that issues are dealt with sensitively, and that we don't see a situation in which individuals and organisations feel they don't have either the way of asking, or that they don't feel it's being handled in a proportionate way.
Vicky Slade.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. One of my constituents described this code of conduct as trans-apartheid. Another said it was state-sponsored repression. Now, I'm really concerned because if the rules say that somebody cannot enter a toilet of the gender for which they weren't born, so let's flip it, because we always talk about trans women. Let's talk about trans men. A trans man is no longer allowed to go into a men's toilet, but they may not be allowed to go into a ladies' toilet, which of course was the sex at their birth. By which point they become quite a threatening prospect for some people, because they are often exceptionally well-built young people. But it's the woman who is able to say they feel uncomfortable about that person in their toilets. So where is the human rights and the privacy of the trans person in all of this? Because I'm really concerned that we've actually missed the very group of people who are most affected.
Madam Deputy Speaker, if someone has concerns about users of the opposite sex, or they perceived to be of the opposite sex, and raises that with a service provider, the draft code says that if someone is asked to confirm their sex, this should be done sensitively and with their privacy protected. It also outlines that staff should be equipped to handle such sensitive situations. But if someone still wants to engage someone they believe to be in the wrong space, we would expect that they do so in a way that does not compromise anyone's safety. Women should not have to face intrusive questioning simply because they do not conform to feminine stereotypes, and the draft code is explicit that service providers must handle any such queries sensitively and proportionately, and obviously everyone must have access to the services they need.
Jessica Toll.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. A number of my constituents have raised concerns about this draft code. One trans woman wrote to me to say that she and her partner are frightened for her safety and ability to take part in public life. She fears being forced to stay at home rather than risk humiliation confrontation or even being outed in public if she can't use public facilities safely. So can the Minister reassure me and this House that as the code is considered, the government will ensure that trans people are not effectively driven out of public life and remain able to participate safely, fully and with dignity?
I thank my honourable friend, and she is absolutely right. No one, trans people, and no one should be driven out of public life and their ability to live their lives as they wish. And it is extremely important. She raises a very important point about why this must be done so sensitively and why it is also an important responsibility for service providers to be able to respond and to adapt as needed to ensure that we have an inclusive society. And it is not unreasonable to expect there to be safe and private toilets for people to use when they are out and about.
Could I suggest to the Minister that the very clear Supreme Court judgment and this resulting guidance renders the Gender Recognition Act irrational? Because that is an act which persists with the fiction that by filling out a few forms you can change your sex on official documents. And yet the Supreme Court was very clear that gender recognition certificates are of no effect in changing one's legal sex. So isn't it time that we stop pretending, under any guise, that one can change one's sex or change biological reality?
I'll just say one thing in response to the honourable gentleman, which is that it's extremely important that we treat trans people with respect, and secondly, that the Equality Act will continue to protect trans people and their rights in law.
Tracy Gilbert. Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome the clarity that the Code brings for service providers and note that Women's Aid is just one of the organisations who's also welcomed it too. Can my honourable friend confirm that the Supreme Court judgment and the Code have not revoked any rights for anyone but confirm single-sex rights that protect women and girls?
I thank my honourable friend for her question. I wasn't quite clear on the question, but what I will say is that this draft guidance is about supporting women and their rights and the provision of single-sex spaces alongside treating trans people with dignity, and that will continue to be our focus.
Charlotte Kane.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've also had lots of trans people, their families and friends contacting me with genuine fear about the implications of this guidance. We've heard about the practicalities. I've got someone who has cancelled a hip operation because they're not sure they will be treated with dignity when they go into hospital. I have people who are changing their pattern of work and travel and leisure because they can't be certain that they can use toilets unchallenged, and therefore face extra risk of violence. But the thing that really comes through really strongly from all of them is the challenge this is to their identity. Many of them have lived decades in their gender, and now they're going to have to think of telling their work colleagues, people who think of them as that gender because that's all they've ever known them as, they're potentially going to have to say, actually I was born a different gender, so can you tell me how I can use the toilets, how I can use the changing room? This is just unacceptable.
Order. The Honourable Lady really does need to get to a question. She's spoken for nearly as long as her front bench now.
My question is the Minister going to consider changing the law so the Equality Act lives up to its name?
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Equality Act, I believe, does live up to its name, and I'm proud of the Equality Act. I think what we are discussing here is about compliance with the law, and I know that the whole House will want to send a message that nobody should be concerned about going for their operations or accessing services. And it is important that any concerns are raised directly with those who are providing those services. And I'm sure that reassurance will be given. I think in relation to the debate we are having, she will know that it is important that we get that balance right between supporting women and their rights and making sure that we uphold respect for all trans people.
Fenton Glynn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I try to start from a position of empathy on this. I have no idea what it is to experience the pain of being born in a body that doesn't record of your gender. And I don't know what it is to have the very real fear of assault that women live with. So I recognise the need for understanding and balance. However, I don't think that there's sufficient balance in this guidance. With a focus on proportionality in the guidance, businesses and organisations are forced to make judgment calls in this highly sensitive area. And there's a real risk that the guidance will create a situation where trans people, who are already facing high levels of discrimination, have a real urinary leash controlling where they can go. So can the Minister please tell me how the government will act to ensure that trans people are not excluded from services and are welcomed into public spaces as everyone should be?
Madam Deputy Speaker, what I have said before, it is extremely important that everyone has access